Right, good afternoon, members. This is our Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee meeting for Monday the 28th of October. And already we're running behind by 1 minute, so my apologies for that. Start as we need to go on. Let's reminding you all that our fire evacuation procedures are that there is no scheduled alarm today. Let's just hope nothing happens because it looks pretty wet and windy out there. So in the event that we do have to go out there, please all stick together and congregate calmly at the entrance to War Memorial Park. Remind you that this meeting is being webcast. And that means we have to be on our best behaviour whilst we're on webcast. And I'll remind you of any procedure should we need to go into closed session, although there's nothing scheduled that I can see from the papers. If I can receive any apologies for absence, I'll inform you that I have apologies from Councillor Mrs Cubitt and Councillor Keating. I don't have any substitutions for either there.
Sorry, Chair, I thought you had. I'm substituting for Councillor Keating.
Thank you. I thought your presence suggested you were here for someone, but I haven't been notified of that, so thank you. I think we'll assume that it is for today. Thank you. So, Councillor Watts.
Can I just say I'm a permanent replacement for Councillor Gurdon, but I do so under protest because I think this is an incredibly stupid time to have a meeting.
Well, I'm going to say we might take that under other advisement as and when committees start to change as a result of the Constitutional Working Party. But for now, I'm afraid this is the time we have the meeting, and we'll do our best to hold to that. So resignations and replacements, that deals with Councillor Potter. Declarations of conflicts of interest. Anybody got anything to start with? No? Okay, thank you. Urgent items, I'll remind you that there are none today, as on the paper. Which takes us into confirming the minutes for the last meeting at paper A. Yep, everybody happy? Thank you. Oh, go on then. Almost got there.
Bottom of page 5 of 97, 3EN. Committee also requested a comprehensive report on the operations and closure of 3EN. When are we going to get that report?
It's coming to a future committee, and I believe at the moment it's scheduled for November, bearing in mind that this committee meeting today is the previous committee meeting in two parts. Basically, I split the agenda because we had a lot on one agenda. So that's coming to the next scheduled ARGA, which presently is November. Councillor Leake, you had a comment?
Well, similar vein, bullet point at the top of the next page, and the last bullet point over the further down the page. And could I also say that I wasn't persuaded by the officer email relating to St Andrew's Medical Centre. I mean, it does seem to me that one shouldn't embark on building something if you're going to spend 3.6 million to finish up with something that is only worth 3 million, because if we did that with all our assets, we'd be bust quite quickly. But I would like to know what the position is with regard to employees' interest, knowing that it's an interest in Mrs. Cubitt in her absence, and really on the section 106, where we are with that.
Okay, section 106, a report on that is coming forward at the next meeting as well. And so we dealt with 3N. If there's further questions about the surgery evaluation, can they be picked up outside the meeting, or are they things that we need to? Yeah, is that something we can respond to outside the meeting, particularly on the surgery?
Well, I'm personally no. I mean, we I think it's important that residents are aware that we built something for 3.6 million and within months have valued it at only 3 million. Now, I know it serves a social purpose, but I do think if we are going to invest through, I think that was an invest to grow investment, then we have to make sure that these are assets which they should, in my view, be equal to the cost on day one, or we need to actually build them to a specification that allows us to achieve that target.
Yeah, I fully take the point. I'm trying to get to is what's the action arising from it, because I absolutely understand where you're coming from. The question raised at the last session was, can we understand the valuation and get some information about that? We've had that information by email. You're now commenting that on as a result of that information, you're making a comment about it. I'm just trying to work out what's the follow-up action you'd like to have in order to record that.
Well, I'd like this committee just to actually discuss that matter. I don't mind if it's at a future meeting, but if every single investment is going to be immediately, everything we build at a certain cost is then going to be valued at a lower amount, then I think that's something this committee needs to discuss, frankly.
Okay, and I think if you're in agreement, then we'll pick that up with the probably the paper on the Section 106 we've got next time round. That's got 2 items coming to the next committee meeting, and I suggest perhaps we have something there that talks about the valuation, both of the surgery and the topic more generally around the valuation of capital investments. I've got Councillor Parker, but if this is it on this matter? Right, Councillor.
Just on this matter, I think the point that raises in my mind is the process and the whole management of, because the actual building of the medical centre is something I think we all agree on. It's the actual process we went through to achieve that, and the implications of that for future projects that we need to draw the lessons from. And I would throw into the mix on that one the moles, because there are a number of capital examples that we really do need to pick apart from a process point of view and a management point of view, and a number of them involve consultants. And I think that's another aspect to this that we haven't yet unpicked, if you like, the role of consultants in the process. Whether that's a standalone item or whether you can fit that in the 106 is something else entirely, because they're 2 fairly juicy subjects.
Sorry, I misheard you then. I thought you said that's a scandalous item rather than a standalone item. But if I can, then what I suggest is that we have a paper coming along on Section 106 and contributions there. We perhaps ask for a similar view on where we are with our capital investments, and particularly the point you made about lessons learned. Kevin.
I was going to say, I didn't want to get too many things coming in at once. I think in terms of the valuations, it'd be useful for, if the committee wants some more information, if we restrict that paper to detail about the valuations and how the valuations change when capital expenditure is incurred, because that was the issue on that particular valuation.
I would disagree with that. I think that Councillor Harvey's made an extremely valuable point, and I think it's something we should really follow up on. And thank you for raising the point about the mouse, because I had forgotten that one, and I knew there was another one that I was concerned about. It is the principle of making investments and not controlling it, and making sure that we actually get an adequate return on our investment.
Okay, so I think the point we want to discuss and debate in this meeting is securing appropriate process for valuation, and then ensuring that we get visibility of that valuation when it changes, and learning lessons from the past. I think the only issue there then is timeliness for the next meeting, and it may well be that that's a paper for a future meeting. So I'll ask officers to schedule when it's appropriate for it to come back to us, but not lose sight of it. So I suspect that won't be November. Okay. Councillor Watts, is it on this issue? Because I know I've got Councillor Parker waiting.
Following on from Councillor Leake, he used the word controlling, and that's the point at which I said here.
Yeah. Point made. Okay. Councillor Parker, you want to move us on?
Thank you, Chair. We're back to the minutes of the previous meeting that was held at 2 o'clock, and I appreciate Councillor Watts wanting to make his mark very early on, but as a long-standing member of this committee, I'd like to endorse this starting time of 2 o'clock as being the most sensible time. I appreciate I'm also now on the back of comment made by Councillor Leake in regard to the spot on the top of page 6 of 97. That was what I had marked just to make sure to ask, to be clear, can we have some sort of timetable, some agreed action and a timetable?
Yes, I think what I can do is firstly introduce you to our interim head of governance, and we had an update for you on the register of interests, and if I can ask Anne to perhaps give you a quick update on where we are on that.
That one, sorry. My name's Anne Brown. I am interim head of governance. I started a few weeks ago. This is an issue that has been lately raised with me, and I've had a look at what currently lies within your constitution on this. The Code of Conduct at the moment requires officers to raise the issue with their line managers. It doesn't require a register, and it would require a change in that Code of Conduct. I am aware that there is some work already ongoing on the Code of Conduct, although I don't know the detail of that. I would suggest that perhaps I kind of email members and bring back something when I've had a more opportune chance of actually assessing what changes are already in the pipeline. Most of these things, to be honest, are standard nationally, although there can be slight variations from one council to another. But because it's usually part of terms and conditions, there's usually a national standard that authorities sign up to.
So I think that's a statement of where we are, and an opportunity to do something about it as we go through our current review of constitution and process, and then see where we go from there. Any further comments on that one at the moment? Councillor Parker.
Yes, just to say thank you for that, but the one very fundamental point that and the purpose of my raising it, and I think also joined by Councillor Leake, or I joined him, I forget the actual historics of it, is that we felt it was very important that there was some form of transparency or some way of the interests, the basis of the officer's interest is not one that is declared. And we wanted to move closer to a similar system that is applying for members.
Chairman, whilst I'd like to take the credit for it, it wasn't me. As I said earlier on, it was Councillor Mrs. Cubitt, who was concerned about a planning issue, if you recall, relating to Manydown.
So can I take it, or Councillor Mitchell, before we on this matter? No. Right, but not in this topic. Can I suggest then that we do seem to have a degree of sort of consensus and interest on this topic, that we sort of basically recommend that as we look at the current review of the documents we have, that it's a recommendation of this committee to consider that officers look at a register of interest or some form of declaration commensurate with that which applies to members at the moment. Now, whether or not that's adopted, nonetheless, this is a recommendation from this committee. Okay, is that agreed? Thank you. Okay, Councillor Mitchell, on the minutes.
On the same page, Chairman, the fifth bullet point in the next section, 2711, Statement of Accounts. I was stopped rather in my tracks by the word aggressive. I am entirely in sympathy with what I think was the sentiment that gave rise to that word, but it has a rather warlike and military connotation. And I feel something more like prompt, assertive and determined approach would more accurately depict what we're trying to achieve.
well, nobody noticed anyway because I haven't put my... So, item 11, use of regulation of Investory Powers Act. I can advise you that the committee needs note that we have no referrals since the last meeting of Audit, Governance and Accounts, and that is that there have been no requests or authorisations granted for directed surveillance, covert human intelligence sources, or urgent oral approvals. Noted. Okay, thank you. That moves us on swiftly to paper B, which is item 12, the regulation of investigatory powers, annual review of policy. Members will have received by email in advance of this meeting a quite detailed and comprehensive track change version of this report, which looked fairly daunting, but at least helped you see exactly where the report had been amended to reflect changes in regulation and good practice. And I'll ask Jackie to introduce the report for us. Jackie.
This is, as Councillor Cherrett said, is the annual review of the policy. We're required to undertake an annual review. So if I outline, as in 3.2, the main changes to the policy, I would say the track changes version does cover every single little change. So, you know, paragraph changes, and so it is fairly horrendous to look at. Main changes are policies based on the revised Home Office guidance and now covers all activities available to local authorities under RIPA. This includes the ability to acquire communications data. We have never in the past acquired communications data, although we've always had the ability to do so. The main reason this is now included within the policy is it was raised with me last year as part of the draft communications bill that the government was then looking at, which has now come to a stop. There was nothing different in that bill to what is currently in Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, so there was no change there, but as it hadn't been included in the policy, for completeness it now is. We've made it clear in the policy that the Council's policy is not to undertake surveillance unless it is absolutely necessary. It will always be a last resort. There's clarification on the role of magistrates, who we now have to get authorisation from before we undertake any surveillance. Non-urgent authorisations are now not available to local authorities because of the change which resulted in us having to obtain magistrates' approval. We are not allowed to undertake urgent authorisations, which in the past we were able to do. I've rejigged the policy just to make it flow slightly better, hopefully, and reference is made to the use of body cameras. This is something that is under discussion in some areas, and it's something the police are using, but it's to ensure that any use of body cameras, if we do as a council use them, is not covert surveillance. They are clearly signed, they are only used in certain circumstances. In particular, I try to pick up issues raised by members in the past, particularly in relation to using third parties to undertake surveillance on the council's behalf and thereby not going down the authorisation under RIPA route. It will always be the council's responsibility. So even if we did use a third party, we would still be responsible for obtaining authorisation and having that authorisation approved by a magistrate. I think they're the main changes, but if there was any questions.
Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check that in the context of the report makes reference to Appendix 1? Do we read the same as the appendix, which is then showing as Appendix A on the paper, to start with?
Yes, my apologies. I had used Appendix 1 throughout to begin with, change it to Appendix A, and then forgot to change that particular one. So it is all referring to Appendix A, so I do apologise for that.
And could I then just also establish in the order of seniority responsibility under the RIPA rules, who's the top person of seniority, I had a bit of difficulty. Is it head of paid services, or is it the RIPA monitoring officer?
Appendix A gives the roles and responsibilities. The authorising officers are Chief Executive and the 2 directors. They are the only people who can actually authorise applications to use surveillance. The senior responsible officer has general oversight of RIPA within the authority, so that there are 2 distinct roles. So the Chief Executive is an authorising officer, so it has doesn't have an overview in that respect. The overview is with the senior responsible officer. Sorry, does that make sense?
Yes, it helps to clarify, which I struggled a little bit through the paper. And if I could just... there was just a couple of other things. If I could just refer to page 16 of 97, and just, it's a question with a bit of a suggestion, Chair, if I can go that far, because I don't know whether whether this will go into debate or just be noted.
Try it and see.
Would just be to suggest maybe the paragraph, from what I tried to glean from the report, paragraph 1.2 is very, very important in terms of the policy, and it sits within the introduction, and I think it rather takes the degree of importance of that paragraph, and I would have liked to suggest that it sits underneath purpose and objectives. Reading through the report, that would be just a suggestion I would like to make, but I think it in itself, which again re-emphasise the authorisation and so forth. Just reading it, Chair, I had difficulty in quite understanding the role of authorisation, the role of monitoring, and where each sits with regard to the authority that had to be sought by officers.
I think it raises a fair point of clarification in terms of the difference between those who grant authorization to use the powers and those who oversee the use of those powers. And maybe just a tweak of the wording needs to make it more explicit, because I recognise also that there is inevitable internal hierarchy there as well, and it must be clear that the one has a role outside of that hierarchy in monitoring. Yeah. Councillor Harvey. Yeah. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. Reading through this, there were just a few questions I just wanted to raise, really, a few points to get some clarification on. From a principal position, I have a real problem with all of this. I mean, from a civil liberties point of view, I've got a real issue with the implementation of something like this. On 3.8, a local authority may not authorise the use of directed surveillance under RIPA to investigate a disorder that does not involve a criminal activity, and so on. It's the clarity of that, of where the line is, that I would like to understand a little bit better. Where is the line in that respect? And that relates to a couple of the other points. On 5.1, it talks about very exceptional circumstances in relation to covert human intelligence services and so on. You know, under what circumstances? Where do we set out what those exceptional circumstances may well be? Where's the guidance and the framework that goes with that? I'd be interested to know. And then officers that would be operating under that, do they have a set of unambiguous guidelines and a set of very clear operating instructions of what they can and cannot do and how they should operate? If it's left to interpretation, then I've got a problem with it. If it's set down in guidance about what should be done, then I'd like to understand that. in the 6.1 bit, I think the relevant judicial authority bit is absolutely key for me. But then that raises the question in 6.9, when we talk about the head of paid service, is the head of paid service skilled, trained and equipped to make those judgments? And where is that tick in the box to say yes they are and they can? And then if we do look at the hierarchy, where do complaints, routes of appeal or challenges that may well be made to any particular application of this fit? And again, I come back to the point, and I've said this time and time again, the head of governance should not be the same role as the monitoring officer. They are two distinct roles, and how can you be the head of governance involved in a hierarchy like this, and then be a monitoring officer who may well be presented with an external reference or an external complaint? And if that is not the process, what is the process for challenge? There's just a few open questions, really, from a civil liberties point of view that came to mind when I was reading this and not seeing the full picture. Maybe, obviously, it relates to documents that aren't part of the report, but to documents that Jackie's got that give us the fuller picture, that help her do the role. And then I've got a final point to make about the recommendation, Chair.
I could probably answer a few of those points. In relation to 3.8, local authority may not authorise use of directed surveillance. We are now restricted to only being able to undertake surveillance under RIPA for criminal offences which attract a custodial sentence of at least 6 months. So a key area of the authorisation now will be determining that whatever we are wanting to investigate will attract or may attract a custodial sentence. I mean, it may not ultimately lead to a custodial sentence, but that within the legislation there is the ability to have a custodial sentence. So, for example, fraud. Under the Fraud Act, custodial sentences of up to 10 years. So that would fall under quite clearly, the ability to undertake surveillance if as a last resort, that was the only way to investigate a fraud case. What we have done is some research has been undertaken in relation to the various enforcement powers the council has and the legislation governing those, and whether or not custodial sentences are a potential outcome for those. I haven't done it yet, but I will be adding something to the Sinbad pages on RIPA, which will actually clearly identify the types of offence and whether or not there is the ability for a custodial sentence of more than 6 months. Hopefully that makes it clearer for staff as well as the authorising officers. So that's that particular one. Covert human intelligence sources. We have never ever done that. I don't think there's anything written down which says what the exceptional circumstances would be. However, there is guidance issued by the Home Office in relation to the care we would have to take if we use this. Now, this could equally relate to a member of staff working undercover, or it could relate to, for want of a better word, an informant. So there's two things which would come under this. In relation to members of staff working undercover, they have to have a handler. They have to. It's very much how the police would use undercover agents. We would never ever go down that route. The authorisation of that has to be so strictly controlled, and that is laid out in guidance given by the Home Office, that it is, say, extremely unlikely that we would ever authorise anything like that. I can't think of an example where we would do it. I'm not sure if that gives you the... We don't. No, we just don't. I mean, the police probably frequently do it, but we don't have officers trained for a start, and we don't have the facility to have handlers in place and, overseeing their care. There are so many health and safety issues for officers if we ever went down that route. All I can say, it would have to be extremely exceptional. And as I say, I can't think of an example of how that would come about.
No, thank you very much. I mean, I appreciate that, and I guess that's the issue for me, because if it is one of those situations where We're never ever going to use this, but one day somebody somewhere decides that. And that's the issue of the ambiguity of it. You know, what are the very exceptional circumstances? Who, you know, it's the who watches the watchers routine. You know, where is the guidelines in this? Where is the ambiguity removed so that we're pretty clear? And I appreciate it might be a 1 in 1,000 and God knows what event that doesn't relate to the actual operation, full stop, of what we do. You know, it's never going to happen. But just in that one example where it does, and if we're going to have a policy for something, in that one example where it does, I want to be reassured that the civil liberty side of things are protected, and I don't see that in this at the moment. I haven't seen it in the legislation, full stop. And I know that is a totally hypothetical thing to say, but we're approving a policy that may then be put into action. We have to accept that, even though we don't believe it ever would be. It may. Therefore, what are the consequences of us making that decision sat around the table? That's the issue I have with that.
I think we do need to bear in mind, you know, whilst I accept the concerns expressed, then one of the reasons why there's been changes to the national legislation is to try and guard some authorities against their previous use of these powers, which have been rather liberal. I think this council has a record so far of being more cautious and actually quite shy of using these processes because they do take them seriously, and that's exactly why every meeting we have a standard item 11, that says in the event of consideration of these things, then we at least have an early sight of it, and have the ability to pass comment or scrutinise their approach. So I think we do have checks and balances in place, although I do understand your broader concerns about this type of legislation.
I mean, no criticism, officers, no criticism of the council, no criticism at all. But if we're saying here as members we're being asked to endorse something, I can't not raise the issues. And then also that relates to obviously the head of paid service being skilled, and you know, is that a case that we can tick that box? Because it's a fairly important power that we're giving there, and that relates to the recommendation. If I just raise this, Chair, to finish on, the recommendation asks us to endorse the authorising of the head of governance and monitoring officer to keep policy up to date and make minor amendments, and to amend the list of posts as set out. I would be uncomfortable with that. I do want to see the democratic oversight of that. I would not want to see that delegated to officers.
Okay, I'm just going to consider that one a second. Is there any other? Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Parker following. Councillor Mitchell? Right, I've got hands up all the way. Andy on that particular point. Yes, Councillor Potter.
Well, really, I mean, no, it's a question.
I've got questions on that particular point, or additional questions. Councillor Potter.
Well, if I may, Chair, simply it was, if I could ask in terms of the answer that perhaps we get, really, I can't understand the logic of the need for the list of posts to be extended. It just seems to me it's pretty comprehensive as it is. I can't anticipate circumstances where you would need more nominated officers than are listed, and therefore the sort of hypothesis that the head of governance and monitoring officer could actually have that discretion, and what the need of that is, escapes me really. So if that could be included in the answer, Chair.
Okay, so on that particular point, I take the point from the recommendation is not that we're against authorising the head of governance and monitoring to keep the policy up to date, in the sense that it keeps or makes reference to minor amendments required by legislation or other external, statutory guidance. It's more about then the amendment to the list of posts, in the sense that we want reference of that before it happened. Okay, I understood that, and I will revise that while we carry on with the questions. I've got Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Parker with questions.
Thank you, Chairman. I have two questions. One is on page 17 of 97, or page 4 of 16. Covered human intelligence source includes undercover officers, public informants, and people who make test purchases. I'm just wondering, how do we define that? Because we ourselves as a council employ for our own purposes, and quite rightly so too in my opinion, the mystery shopping approach to quality control of our own affairs. where somebody makes a call to the council and as purports to be about planning or benefits or housing, in order to test how effectively we respond. Somebody writes to the council asking for something to see whether we're responding within X time. And that could well be, using the broader sense of the word purchases, seen as test purchases. I'm just wondering, what do we think we mean by test purchases in this case, and how are we excluding from that our own practice, which almost every sensible organisation does, of mystery shopping as part of its own quality control processes?
Test purchases in this respect more relates to trading standards, where they maybe send underage children into shops to buy alcohol, or so it again, it's something that we are very unlikely as a district council to do. So it wouldn't relate to the mystery shopping, for example. That.
But it doesn't say what it is, and it doesn't say that it doesn't apply, if you see what I mean. I don't want to get us to get into some peculiar thing in some future date. I know this is hypothetical, because a lot of this is hypothetical, since we don't actually apply any of these powers most of the time. Haven't done so in recent history. But hypothetically, I'm an officer who's responsible for some particular activity, and somebody does a mystery shopping exercise, and I'm hauled over the coals, and I say, but hold on, that you're using a covert human intelligence source here, which is illegal. I'm going to report you to whoever I report these things to, because we have been using a covert human intelligence source as defined by that paragraph, making a test purchase or something from the council, like advice on planning.
Can I say that this is concerning?
I know what it's concerning. I fully understand what it says. But I'm trying to tease out is how does it exclude what I'm talking about?
Yes, this is concerning the gathering of evidence in relation to enforcement action, and I would suggest the purpose of the scenarios you've given is around the quality of provision of services, and its purpose is not intended to formulate enforcement action. So what I'm saying is I think there's a significant difference there in terms of in terms of the purpose of it.
What I'm doing now.
Can you use your mic in future?
Fine, I'm happy. Fine. And the other question was, it's been alluded to by the chairman en passant, that we do have lots of news stories about other councils using covert techniques to detect benefit fraud and so forth. Do we think that the fact that we seem not to do that means that we think it's a bad idea, or that we don't have that type of fraud, or we don't think we have that type of fraud, or we think the other authorities are overusing the powers and shouldn't be doing so? I mean, how are we different from those authorities that regularly get reported as having found, Mr. Jones is swimming coach in the swimming pool when he can't cross the road to go to work?
I'm not sure that's a question that we can ask officers to. Yes, but you can express a view. I'm not sure you can express a view for the council, but
I can obviously not talk for other councils, but in relation to fraud, for example, there are other ways which are less intrusive and which aren't covert, which we now use. Our fraud team will undertake quite a lot of data matching, which will throw up if somebody's perhaps claiming a single person's discount but is linked with another person for another purpose, and a lot of the investigations are now paper and desk based, so they no longer have to actually go out and undertake surveillance on people. There are other ways of obtaining the information outside of fraud for other things like fly tipping, for example, we won't undertake surveillance covertly, which is the key. You know, if we put signage up to say, you know, in an area which is prevalent for fly tipping, to say that CCTV may be operating in this area, that's no longer covert, that's overt, and it's not subject to RIPA. So there's clear signs, whether or not we have a camera there. If someone continues to fly tip, then it's not covert surveillance. So there are other ways which we will always use first before going down the covert surveillance route, which is, as I said before, is very, very much last resort, and we would have to demonstrate what else we had tried and failed in order to either detect fraud or catch fly tippers or whatever the situation was.
Thank you, that was helpful. Councillor Parker, back to you on a question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My last question. It's on with regard to records, which is page 26 of 97, and it's 12.3, which is in bolded. Records shall be maintained for a period of at least 3 years. And then I just wanted to make certain with the officer that we're actually then would be going on to say, and only then disposed in accordance with the council's retention and disposals policy, or is there some other, you know, that's contained within the paragraph 12.5. It's the at least 3 years, and sort of that paragraph doesn't go anywhere else. We'd want to know what is the disposal policy, I would have thought, unless we've got to check up on another document on Simbad.
No, in that respect, records are kept for 3 years and then they are securely disposed of in accordance with the retention and disposal policy.
Sorry, so yeah, okay. So it's a minimum maximum. Thank you.
Councillor Leake, question?
Well, in the light of Jackie's response to Councillor Mitchell, where she said that if there was a site where there was fly tipping, we put up a sign saying tippers may, well, cameras may be watching. If we had a little sign outside the benefits department saying those who commit fraud are liable to be watched, could we do away with this and just have the cameras to follow them?
I think the difference there is undertaking surveillance for benefit fraud, for example, may involve sitting at outside someone's house. No, we wouldn't get approval.
Okay, I think that brings us to the end of questions, members. Open for debate. Oh, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. All I wanted just to suggest was during the reading the report, I think I probably found what was missing towards the end, which was again on page 26 of 97, which was the paragraph 12, which I think possibly, I appreciate for the report, it's here and it's how it's presented to us here. But if we are talking of adding this onto Simbad, it might help the reader if you understand the function of the REPA monitoring officer at the start of the report rather than at the end. And I would suggest possibly that consideration is given to the paragraph 12, which is REPA monitoring officer and records management, is actually separated, and it's therefore just a separate section would be REPA monitoring officer, roles and responsibilities. Records and management would come separately maybe, which is a day-to-day running of the thing, and I think it would be possibly also then helpful for paragraph 13, the senior responsible officers, to understand. If you'd read, I felt if I'd read paragraph 12, 2, 12.1, 12.2, and also 13.1, 13.2, prior to going through the whole report, it would have given me a better way of understanding some of the earlier content. And I would think possibly as a reference document to be put on Sinbad. I'm only, it's presumptuous, I know, but I'm suggesting maybe officers might want to think about putting that particular information earlier on than towards the end.
What I was going to say, what do you think, members? Does that help in terms of if the report is just restructured slightly to, or the policy rather is restructured slightly so that we actually have roles and responsibilities up front, so that we are a bit clearer before we get into the body of the report? Any particular issue? I see I've got a couple of speakers there. Just picking that up, I'm wondering also whether members under 14, the roles of councillors, because this is something that we have the responsibility for as ARGA. I notice at 14.2 we get the quarterly notification, which I've already mentioned, as item 11 on our standing agendas. I wonder, given the level of concern within the room about the use of this power, should we ever deign to use it, we should also ask for to be made aware, or members of the committee to be made aware, should this be triggered in the same way we do with some of the other aspects of regulation, so that, if we do get in a position we want to use these powers, we at least have an awareness of it. Perfectly entitled for you to agree. As a committee, we need to come to a point. I was making a suggestion and wanted to know your views. Councillor Mitchell, then, go on.
I would resist that, because we start a hair running unless you're going to get members to start to be told the detail of who's being investigated and why. There is little point in telling them at the beginning of an investigation that we're making an investigation. How are members able to do anything or think anything about that point? I mean, they could go and talk to the chief executive who's authorised it and say, why have you authorised this? And he could have a long and arduous discussion with them. But, unless you're going to disclose it, in which case it's no longer covered, frankly, unless you're all sworn to secrecy, I think it's very messy. And I think it's for members, this is an operational matter. Members have the right to look at it afterwards, when we see a report saying this has been used, to ask the background, and to ask what was the rationale and justification, what was the outcome, or to have the outcome reported in due course, so that we have confidence we're not going down this path wrongly. But I don't think we should pry into a particular case. In fact, I'd rather not be told about it till it was completed.
Is that the view of Councillor Harvey?
I think in relation to the way we get data protection breaches and the way that other elements are covered, there is a role for, and as Councillor Potters really, the chair perhaps in the context of where it leaves, a notification that somebody from a democratic point of view is informed these powers are being used. Retrospectively, as we do with data protection and the others, we should be made aware, not of the details of the case, that's not the point, but that the point that the powers have been used, and that any consequences, any lessons learned, any elements of that need to be thoroughly, carefully considered. I just don't think it should be a simply operational matter, because these matters, if they're then put into operation, affect somebody's rights and responsibilities and civil liberties, and that's where the line's got to be drawn. We would then be, in hypothetical, if you choose to monitor somebody, you are infringing their civil liberties. And we have to have some sense of an element of control, or at least oversight of that. And if that's just the chair being told we have used these powers, that's fine. But then that puts the responsibility on the chair to decide, this is a matter that perhaps or doesn't. Details of the case out in the issue is the use of the powers that's the principal point here.
And for clarity, it was just a notification of use of the powers I was referring to, not the details. But Councillor Parker.
Well, I just think that we have the quarterly update, and I think that's as far as we would want to, at this point in time, bearing in mind the basic fundamental principles of the policy is that this would be used as a very last resource, and I think that's been emphasised strongly throughout the report, then there's no need for the members of this committee to be told on the sanctioning, on the authorisation of the powers to be used, other than through the quarterly report. Subsequent would be my view. I would agree with Councillor Mitchell in that case.
I think. Go ahead.
Just for the record, I do not personally wish to be informed of such matters other than through the report to this committee, and at that time I do not wish to have any detail of the matter reported to me in any way, shape or form until after the matter is closed.
Councillor Potter, perhaps last chance before I close this particular matter, and I wonder about raising it, but go on.
It's really only in the context of the body of the report. I mean, coming back to the point, I know Councillor Mitchell said he was happy with the response he got under 3.2.17 and 97 about the covert human intelligence source and who makes test purchases. It seems to me, I think the answer we had was that this is in regard to enforcement action. If that is the case, then quite frankly, I think it could be included within this text anyway, just to make that absolutely clear. If that's the case, let's make that clear so there isn't any ambiguity on it. And coming back, Chair, obviously to the point that we raised originally, in regard to the list of authorising officers and senior responsible officer and RIP and monitor, I mean, my view is, in terms of what we keep describing as the exceptional and rare use of these, it seems to me we have a list of officers who are more than sufficient for the purpose. I cannot see a situation occurring where none of those people are available to make the decisions, and therefore the discretion that seems to be suggested under the recommendations that are before us really are unnecessary, and I'd rather see those taken out without that coming back to this committee and this committee being told why that list needs to be extended.
Okay, do you have any other points of debate in your wish to? Councillor Watts? Anybody else?
Yes, Madam Chairman, since there have been several references to civil liberties, there's something I feel strongly about. I would just draw attention to paragraph 3.1 on page 16 of 97, which I think deals with the issue. What this says is that RIPA does not provide any powers to carry out covert activities, and RIPA regulates them in a manner that's compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. Well, I'm very much in favour of the European Convention on Human Rights, and therefore there needs to be appropriate regulation. But are people confusing civil liberties with human rights? The civil liberties are those granted to us by the, if you like, the state, the society we're in, and so on. Human rights are those who are intrinsic in being human. I don't agree with Councillor Harvey that if these powers are being used, then your civil liberties are being infringed. But provided it's done in a way that doesn't infringe my human rights, then I think the community's got a right to investigate if there's a reasonable reason for supposing I'm defrauding somebody. So I as a firm defender of civil liberties and a very firm believer in human rights, I'm content with this because I think paragraph 3.1 deals with it.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Any more comments or debate before I try and sum that one up? Okay. If you can pop your light off for me.
Sorry, Chair.
Oh. Yep, Councillor Parker. Yeah, Councillor Watts, your light's still on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to seek, Chair, your understanding of where we are with regard to the, under the recommendations, it's been raised a couple of times, which is the authority to the head of governance to amend the list of posts. Can we just make sure there is a firm agreement or disagreement in this context?
that's a nice lead into what I was about to do, which was to sum up the points I think we've discussed, and where there's lack of clarity on which way I think we're leaning. I will ask for your deciding view. So I think what we've looked at is in approving the revised policy, we're looking for some clarity around the definition of roles between SRO and authorising officers, and perhaps amending the wording and the positioning within the report of those roles and responsibilities, both at 1.2 Appendix 1 and paragraphs 12 and 13, because that would perhaps help clarify earlier on in the report exactly who is responsible for what and how that responsibility works between different appointed roles and the hierarchy within the organisation. I think we also discussed the guidance on use of these powers, and whilst we accept the concerns in respect to these powers, specifically at points 3.8, 5.1 and 6.1, I think as a result of the discussion we convinced ourselves that as an enforcement power we are very much aware of how this is used, the Council's policy to use it only as a power of last resort, and it's our role within ARGA to oversee that use and support the Council officers in considering the use of that policy. I think we had a particular view about test purchasing and a useful conversation there in respect of whether that extended to mystery shoppers, and I think certainly I am satisfied that with the spirit of REPA being very much around enforcement and evidence base, then it's not intended to capture such things which are not intended for evidence, so mystery shoppers are for a different purpose and therefore should not be captured by this legislation. I think then we get to the point in respect of sorry, I missed a bit about the removal or the separation rather at 12 of the roles between the actual officer role and the records management role, and I think that's probably quite helpful to separate those two out, as they are distinct functions and might also not always be undertaken by exactly the same person. Then we get to this point in terms of our recommendation that if we approve the revised policy subject to those comments and revisions, the second bullet of the recommendation is that we authorise the Head of Governance and Monitoring Officer to keep the policy up to date insofar as it makes amendments required by legislation or statutory guidance. So we're very specific that the amendments are those triggered by legislation or statute. And I was going to suggest then that we sort of put a full stop there and say that any amendment to the list of posts set out in Appendix A be referred to this committee before they are enacted. Does that kind of capture the spirit of what you were talking about? Yes? Okay. Is there anything I've missed there, members? No? Are we agreed with that recommendation then? Thank you. Shall we move on to paper C then, please? Paper C is the Data Protection Act routine matter for information. It's a report following on from our previous meeting, where we were advised of a data breach. So if I ask again Jackie to introduce this report. Sorry, I'm going to ask Anne to introduce the report. My apologies.
Actually, Jackie is going to outline the majority of the report. I just wanted to apologise to members for a slight oversight in that when there was a decision to report the breach to the Information Commissioner, according to our process and procedure which was agreed with this committee, we would have normally informed members at that time, and unfortunately some time elapsed before we actually did inform you by confidential email. So I just wanted to apologise on behalf of the service for that omission before Jackie actually outlines the problem. I can say that I think it's very, very unlikely that it will ever happen again.
Thank you for that, Jackie.
Yes, this report is purely to advise members of a data breach which we reported to the Information Commissioner's office, and the outcome of the Information Commissioner's investigation into that breach. The outcome in this circumstance was to not take any further action against the council because of the steps that we've put in place to prevent any recurrence of any similar breaches happening. Were there any questions or comments on this one?
I've got Councillor Harvey first.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, I mean, not as young as I used to be. Not as young as I used to be.
Come on, members.
The bit in here, I mean, it's actually smell when talking about redactions, considering how much this committee's discussed redactions. I thought it was rather ironic that we were redacting the signature at the end of the letter, considering what the letter was about in the first place. Have we gone back to the individuals involved in this, and have they received a formal apology from the council for what happened in that sense? Have they had that formal process followed through?
They were all contacted when the breach happened to apologise that the breach had happened, and to say that we were going to report it to the Information Commissioner. We've not gone back to them since the ICO have given us their decision, though. It's not something I thought about, to be perfectly honest. But
if the council has formally apologised to them for what happened, that's the point I want to capture. Really, I appreciate what you're saying. It's just, and if it was a proper formal apology rather than a telephone call saying we're sorry, it was a proper apology to them, then that's fine. Got no issue with that at all. It's just the fulfilment of that process, really.
Yeah, sorry, that does raise a question for me whether, if I was in that position and I knew there was going to be an investigation, I'd kind of like to know what the end of the investigation is, and I wonder whether our process currently accounts for that. And it, it's right to apologise at the time it happens. I just wonder whether it's also closing the circle that says, actually, and we investigated it, and we've done whatever we need to do, and actually we were not found to be at fault or whatever. I don't know, it's something that comes to my mind there. Councillor Mitchell?
My own view on that is it's much better to let sleeping dogs lie, because the complaint that was reported to the office of the Information Commissioner was against the council. The council had erred in making these details known about the people. The council has gone through the process properly, and it doesn't seem helpful to the people concerned to remind them again now, after all this time, that some time ago this happened, if you see what I mean. It's past and gone. And I'm with Paul here that if they've had an apology, they've been told and had an apology, because he did cock it up, we're very sorry, we apologise. I think from their point of view, I think it's much better and nicer to let the matter rest.
I seem to have sparked yet further debate. Councillor Potter, Harvey, and then I've got Councillor Leake who's been waiting. Is it on this matter? Please do.
I agree with you. I think we should close the circle. If there has been an investigation, then we should report the results of it back to the complainant.
Councillor Harvey, you had...
It's a quick question. Do they have a right of appeal against any way of that if they don't feel the Information Commission has dealt with it appropriately?
in this particular case, no, there was no complaint from any member of the public. We discovered that we had made an error as soon as the papers had been sent out. They were then recalled from everybody, so including all the neighbours who had made the comments, and at that point we explained what had happened. So no, there was no complaint to begin with. It was a self-reported incident. In relation to appeal, if any individual feels that we have breached the Data Protection Act and we have caused them detriment or distress, they can take us individually to court. As individuals, they can take us to court. That would be there, or they can complain to the Information Commissioner independently, and they would investigate.
Okay, that's helpful in where I think we need to be, and I'm comfortable that it sort of needs to be looked at on its merit. And if there are other avenues for the individual, then let it lie as that from my perspective. I've got Councillor Leake patiently waiting.
Well, it relates to paragraph 3.1. It was a question, and I didn't actually recall the 4 data security breaches. I'm sure we were told. I think, was that the letter that we received from somebody, or I'll finish my question, but that was the first part of it. But if they were all similar data security breaches, I find it slightly odd that the ICO, who have said in their letter that any further incidents will lead to this matter being revisited, and yet we've had 4 security breaches, plus this, the 5th, and I'm surprised they didn't take that into account. But would you like to comment on that?
The breaches referred to in paragraph 3.1 were brought to this committee's attention as part of the annual governance statement. Prior to that annual governance statement, there was no policy or procedure in place to actually let members know where there had been data breach that we'd reported to the Information Commissioner. In terms of them revisiting, I'm not sure how they do this, and whether or not they leave gaps in between, i.e. if we've had several breaches within a short period of time, they will look at them all together. The 4 that resulted in the Chief Executive signing an undertaking were all reported within a very short space of time, so they looked at them all together, which resulted in the undertaking being us having to sign an undertaking. Like I say, that they were in the annual governance statement for 11/12, so they happened prior to the end of 11/12. Whether they leave a reasonable gap, I'm really not sure.
Okay, I've got Councillor Parker and then Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted just to clarify on this the briefing for audit, governance and accounts, which appears as Appendix A, page 34 of 97, which is then headed Reporting of Data Breaches. I think prior to receiving the papers, we received the email from Jackie alerting us to the breach, and attached to that was a similar document, which was Briefing for Audit, Governance and Accounts Committee, Reporting of Data Breaches, dated October 2013, and the 2 documents aren't exactly the same. I'm much more comfortable with the document that was attached to the email, because it goes on to note the process that is to be used for not reporting but advising members of this committee. And I'm rather seeking clarification and requesting, should the fuller document not be the one that is attached to and agreed by this committee.
The Appendix A, the original reporting of data breaches, that was a procedure put together following the audit committee, which had the annual governance statement. So when it first came to light that there had been data breaches that the committee was unaware of, I was asked to put together a procedure to ensure that you were made aware of future data breaches. I put that together, and that was sent out at the time. Following a recent incident, which I've emailed you separately about, I have revamped the procedure for letting you know, to bring into effect essentially an early report via email, as opposed to waiting for a report to come to a committee meeting. So if there is a breach where we feel we have to report it to the Information Commissioner's office, you will receive a confidential email at that point to say this has happened, brief details, but you won't receive a report to this committee until such time as the Information Commissioner has undertaken an investigation and made a decision as to what action, if any, they will take. If the decision is to take action against the council, so another undertaking or a fine, then you would be informed again via email rather than waiting for the next annual audit committee. Mainly because once the Information Commissioner has decided to issue a fine or an undertaking, that's made public on their website. So it's to try and let you know as soon as possible.
Councillor Parker?
Well, this is the point I'm now wishing to make at committee today, is that I would think it would be preferable for the second version to be the version that we agree, because it's more comprehensive and it allows for members of the committee to be notified. Not a report, to be notified. And I think if all members at the meeting now don't have in front of them or haven't read the wording as per the email dated the 15th of October, then perhaps, Chair, it should be circulated for consideration. Because at the moment in time, my view is, in the committee papers, we are being asked to consider and approve a weaker version of the reporting of data breaches, shall we call it policy or protocol. And I would like to ask that we consider the secondary, which I think is stronger.
I think I get where you're coming from. From my understanding is that this report we've been asked to note because it gives us the facts and conclusion of a breach that was reported to us or we were made aware of previously, and an acceptance that at that point in time there had been an oversight to make us aware at the early stage by email. So I think all we're dealing with is two separate points in time. The paperwork with here today, and relevant to this current matter, paper C, was relevant to how this matter was dealt with. Subsequently, it's been changed. I think you're quite right that the updated, more rigorous version, which allows the process of making us aware by email, not only is the most current version and the one that we would wish to work with, but is also the one that has triggered the very email you're now referring to. So I think if members are comfortable, we kind of have revised and updated the process, and as a result of noting this paper valid at that time, we then that's drawn a line under it. We are now operating to the new procedure. If that's my understanding, we are effectively operating the new procedure anyway. But I'm happy that we just circulate that and get a sort of nodding heads by email if that would help.
I just make the point, Chair, that we've had a lot of discussion on the previous paper where we are approving a policy which is in relation to measures of monitoring and so forth, and this is a sort of a policy almost here, because this is what this is. It's the reporting of data breaches. In itself is very, very important, and I don't mind under which process it happens. I want to be certain that for safeguarding purposes it's officially adopted.
So let's make sure that we minute that our current procedure is the one that is circulated by email, and if necessary, put that one in the, or pen that to the minutes. Yeah, okay. I've got on this point. Okay, Councillor Leake.
I'm not aware of an email of the October the 15th, I have to say. And Councillor Mitchell seemed to indicate that he wasn't either.
We'll need to make sure that you have copies and notification of awareness, yeah. Make sure you get it in hard copy if needs be. Councillor Parker?
Well, Chair, it's, in fairness to the officer, it's on a directory email address and it's to all members of the committee.
Yeah, sorry, it was just, yeah, yeah. Okay, well, so we'll make sure it goes by another route as well to be. Okay, on this point? Yeah. Okay, in patience then, I have Councillor Watts next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A preamble and then a detailed question. I've had a long dealing in data protection because I was secretary of the British Computer Society Specialist Group in 1969, which resulted in the 1978 Act. But I have a sort of feeling that since then things have gone slightly mad, and I have a sort of de minimis view, which people might find deplorable. I did once actually report to licensing that a name had been kept on one of their things, but it never occurred to me as a councillor I should have made sure it was treated as a data breach. And when I got a large pack of papers from Jackie under Freedom of Information Act, I was interested to see my own name was redacted throughout, but I could work out what it was that I'd written. And one of the names was redacted, but the direct line and mobile telephone numbers were included. But again, from the context, it was obvious who it was anyway, and I'm rather concerned that we should treat this very important issue very importantly on important matters. But I am nevertheless going to ask a detailed question, because on paragraph 3.5, page 31 of 97, we have the method of redaction used was undone during the printing process. Now this is an aspect of technology that I'm not familiar with, and how could that possibly be? Oh no. Sorry.
My understanding is a text box was inserted over the information to be redacted, which gives a white covering, and when it was printed, through the printing process, the text box was removed. It's a removable text box anyway, so it's not a permanent redaction method. So that's how this particular one happened.
Do we perhaps need a technical procedure for redaction?
Okay, members, I've got Councillor Leake and then Councillor Gardner next. You've done your bit? Happy enough? Councillor Gardner then.
I'll keep this one short. We only refer to this committee serious breaches, but I'm just wondering in terms of the culture, whether there are a quantity of non-serious breaches which are not being reported, and is it something that internal audit should be looking at?
We do have a data breach policy, which I'm happy to send round to members for you to see what is contained within the policy. The Information Commissioner's Office gives guidance in relation to reporting of data breaches, and there is no legal requirement for us to report a data breach to the Information Commissioner. They would expect serious breaches to be reported, although they do not define what is a serious breach. They give guidance again in terms of what is considered serious. It would be in relation to the volume of data. So if it affected quite a number of people, if the data put the individuals at some form of risk, whether that's sort of physical risk or financial loss. So if for example, we lost data which contained people's bank account details, you're putting somebody at risk of financial loss by doing that. So within our policy, we set out in what circumstances we would be likely to report a breach to the Information Commissioner. I would say I do keep a log of breaches, and some things are reported to us which are investigated as a data breach, but which turn out not to in fact be a data breach. So while we may have something logged as a potential data breach, upon investigation it might be found that it's not. Now, whether that's because a laptop has been lost or stolen, but that laptop is encrypted, initially it's looked at, but because it's encrypted it's not considered to be a data breach. If it was an unencrypted laptop, yes, it would be. Similarly, we've had incidents where we've referred individuals to bailiffs, and they've complained that we have breached data protection by passing their details on to a third party, where it's quite clear in all the correspondence that they owe us money if they do not pay. These are the next steps. We are entitled to do that sort of thing. So we do define serious, although, like I say, there is no legal requirement to report, and the ICO themselves don't define serious. They don't narrow it down very well.
Thank you for the answer, but it doesn't actually address the question, which was non-serious breaches. Those things which are breaches, which are not covered by what we have in the policy, so they do not need to be reported as a serious breach. But the fact that there are breaches indicates there is a culture where there could be in future a serious breach. I'm just wondering what the quantity of non-serious breaches is likely to be, and if we don't know, is it something that internal audit could look at?
For this year, since the 1st of January, I have logged 7 potential breaches. 2 of those have turned out not to be breaches at all. And with the exception of the 2 that we have reported to the Information Commissioner, the remainder are considered not serious enough to report to the ICO. So they may be a letter intended for one person has been put in an envelope for somebody else, but the content of that letter only gives a name and address. It doesn't give any other personal details of a third person. That wouldn't be considered serious in terms of having to report to the Information Commissioner, but it would still be logged as a breach, and we'd still be looking into the procedures in that particular business unit to see whether or not anything can be improved in relation to how they deal with, putting letters in envelopes and that sort of thing. In the policy, there is we have included that if a breach relates to control issues within the particular team or business unit, then we will refer it to an internal audit for an investigation.
Thank you, Jackie. I think the answer to my question was yes, we do know how many non-serious breaches there are. There aren't very many, and it's nothing worth worrying about.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mitchell, another question?
Just a simple question I forgot to ask Jackie earlier. And thank you very much for all your help today. And it looks as if we're pretty good, really, except that, as I think David pointed out, that the serious breaches that really matter are the ones we don't know we don't. But my question was on the ICO's lovely letter with its redacted signatory. Quite right, she probably signed it, or he signed it. Quite rightly used yours sincerely, which I was impressed by. What does protect mean on their correspondence?
That's part of the government's protective marking system, which is used by some government departments, although the ICO is no longer a government department. I'm not sure entirely what it means, because we don't tend to use it here, but the police will use protect and restrict, and it's a category of information which means whether it should be released further than the recipient. I have checked with them that they're okay that we publish this.
Okay, members, I think that concludes questions. Do you have the will and wish to debate the matter? No. In which case, the only item that we need record was to reflect the revised or the updated process for making ARGA aware of potential data breaches or references to ICO. To reflect that in the minutes and to append the copy of that process from the email of the 15th into the minutes. That then concludes paper C. Thank you. That takes us swiftly on to paper D, our risk management policy. And in Paul's absence, I think this is down to Kevin to introduce for us.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is a report on the revised or amended risk management policy and seeks the committee's approval. I was just going to cover some of the key changes that are highlighted in section 4. Basically, this report and this policy merges two existing policies, the existing risk management strategy and the risk management guidance, into one document that hopefully is more readable and understandable. It highlights that the corporate director for governance and commissioning will be the risk management champion. That's in para 1.4 of the policy. It also gives a bit more guidance around definitions for the types of impact and risk, tries to put some parameters around them, which the current policy doesn't do. Highlights that the stewardship team, which is comprises of the Director of Governance and Commissioning, Head of Resources, Head of Governance, the Internal Audit Manager and the HR and Policy Managers, will be responsible for the continuous monitoring of the corporate risk register to make sure that it's up to date, and that annually the corporate risk register and the mitigations will be reviewed as part of the corporate governance audit by internal audit, and the outcome of that audit will be reported to this committee. I just wanted to take members through very quickly Appendix 1, which is the proposed process, and that is on page, it's hard to see, but it's on page 54 of 97. But there is and they've been handed out, an amended sheet on your
Yeah,
desk.
separate sheet.
Given what was said earlier about issues with printing text boxes, this is also an issue with printing a text box, in that two of the boxes didn't come out in the report. So you should have this coloured paper on your desk. Oh, sorry, white. Sorry, you should have a piece of white paper on your desk. I just want to make sure everyone's got them. So I just wanted to very quickly run through the proposed process for the framework for the risk management policy. So on one side, on the left-hand side, you've got the business unit service risks, and those are identified as part of service planning. They're held within the business unit, they're held as part of that service plan, and they should be monitored and reviewed by the departmental management teams on an ongoing basis. Any service risks that are key and that warrant inclusion on the corporate risk register should be referred upwards and be reviewed as part of the stewardship team review. So you've got business unit service risks, that some of which will be on the corporate risk register. You've also got specific corporate risks that are on the right-hand box side, and those again are passed up through to internal audit for inclusion in the corporate risk register. Those are continuously monitored, the proposal is, and reviewed by the risk owner and the relevant member of the senior leadership team. So those corporate risks are monitored on that sort of ongoing basis. They are then held in the corporate risk register. That is reviewed, as I said, by the stewardship team. There will be a 6-monthly update to the senior management group. The senior management group is all of the heads of service plus the strategic directors and the CX. The mitigations and the risk register itself, as I say, will be reviewed annually by internal audit, and then the outcome of that review would be reported to this committee. So that's the proposed monitoring and construction of the risk register. I think that was all I wanted to say as part of the introduction, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Last open with questions. Councillor Parker, then Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Chair. It's just wanted to ask Kevin, if I may, on page 53 of 97, section 9, which talks about training and embedding. Previously in the document it talks about the member's responsibility to understand the authority's risk profile, but I'm not quite sure what it's saying in regard to really how training for members is going to be functioned, other than if it's at discussion and agenda planning meetings and committee. Whereas I see that for employees there's an induction session.
I think that's probably a good point from Councillor Parker. I think the intention is it was around those general inductions. I think and discussions as a result of agenda planning and also within specific reports there will be risk analysis. But I think you're probably right. There probably isn't a specific element of member training there that there probably ought to be that we could look to. And if I may, Chair, throw back a question to the committee is the type of training that the committee would prefer.
Well, I think certainly there should be some aspect of this incorporated in the members' induction, new members' induction as a start, and possibly if it's to be a new sort of emphasis, then maybe existing members could be invited to attend, so you could mop up in a sense, and then certainly my view is it's something that you need to have an initial grasp of, an introduction to at the beginning of your service as a councillor. Other than that, I don't have any other. Not being a trainer myself, I have no.
Yes, I wonder whether another appropriate time is if we get through the revisions of committees and things. Some committees are more likely to look at items that bear risk in the same way that we have training on the strategy for treasury management and risk. It might make sense to target that at specific committees as well. Councillor Watts, you are next.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Page 50 of 97, paragraph 6.6. Reliance is placed on the Council's project management process. Is this the process that was applied in the case of the moles and the medical centre? And if it is, I understand the performance panel was told that a project management handbook is being prepared. Would it be possible for members to have sight of that?
Yes, Chair. When it's produced, we can certainly circulate it.
Councillor Leake.
Mine's on the similar sort of point. Page 46 of 97, where we have financial impacts, and I was just going to ask whether St Andrew's Medical Centre fell into the significant column, and the Mells fell into the catastrophic column, and is that how? And therefore, really, is catastrophic really the right word? That it does seem to be a bit of it's rather extreme, and I would have, we've managed to take a bigger hit than that without bringing us to our knees. Catastrophic is not a word I think I would use. Catastrophic would have to be significantly greater than £1 million to this council. It's an enormous sum of money, and we will be looking into those problems. But can I just give you, as I go through, may I just, on page 47, in the first box in the middle, it says objectives of one section not met, I think it should, just out of curiosity. Not curiosity, as just to help you, in case nobody reads it again. On page 50, I just want to really understand, we've got a whole series of things about things ensuring that it remains up to date, ensuring that things happen. But who does all this ensuring? That's the question that I really want to know. And when we talk about frequently, what do we mean by frequently? So could I have an answer to that? And I've got two other points. On the next page, 51, the penultimate paragraph, analyse the cost and benefits of risk reduction activity undertaken. And I didn't really understand it, so I'd like an example of that if it was possible. And over the page, 52, in the fourth paragraph up, there's indicators as spelt without an A. And in the next page, in the 4th paragraph, you need a 2 after promptly. And that's about really all but I would like the answers to the questions I've raised. Thank you.
In terms of the framework and the monitoring, back to Appendix 1, the phrase used is continuously monitored. So the intention is that these risks are monitored as appropriate, but on an ongoing basis. So in terms of the business units, they will formally be looked at, obviously annually as part of the service plan, but and also during the course of one-to-ones, where there are particular projects, particular risks that have been identified. The more formal collation of that is again, it says continuously reviewed by the stewardship team in terms of the corporate risk register, with six monthly updates to the senior management group. So that will introduce that level of 6 monthly reporting, formal reporting, up of the corporate risk register.
So really, we will wait for internal audit to tell us whether or not they are complying with these frequency measures. Is that correct?
The intention is that internal audit will review the process as part of the corporate governance, and then if there are any issues that come out of that, then they will obviously be reported to the committee. Yes, thank you for that question, Councillor Leake. I think one of the examples, Chair, that I could use there would be, if I use treasury management for example, it could be the type of investment that is used. So if there was a let me say the cost of using the government's debt management office as opposed to using a different type of risk, so a different level of risk, the cost of the mitigation. So if the risk was protection of capital and the DMO was the solution, there would be a cost to that could be assessed, and that would be an element that would be considered under that.
So do you think that everybody who is working within this policy will understand that, and is it adequately expressed or clearly expressed?
I think we could perhaps look at expanding the explanation in the policy to give a bit more detail on that.
Councillor Mitchell, you were next.
Thank you, Chairman. This report has some language that I'm not familiar with in seeing in council documents, some of which I love, some of which I'm not entirely convinced by. I love the idea of having a risk appetite, because it's always been my concern that local authorities, if anything, tend to be too risk averse. And when people complain, after the event that we misestimated something and we got that wrong, that's, we should find out why and reduce the chance it's going to happen again. We shouldn't agonise too much about the fact that occasionally we make mistakes. Because if we never make a mistake, we'll never do anything interesting or new. John raised the question, I'm concerned about the way we're using quite a lot of times the word continuously, because I don't really think it means anything. You can review things, you can keep an eye on things, but I have this vision of a group of people meeting 24/7, 365 days a year, continuously doing something. That's what continuously means. It doesn't mean frequently or infrequently, and these are not real terms, are they? It's we have to say that if there's something which is regarded as such sufficiently risky that it might bring the council to its knees and prevent us from undertaking or fulfilling some really critical regulatory requirement or something, then that needs to have a frequency of review associated with it, which is quite specific. And I want a report on it every week until we've sorted it out, if you like. So I'm not entirely convinced by the word continuous. I do like the idea of a risk culture and appetite. I'm not entirely convinced that everyone who reads this will join me in that delight, or even understand what the hell it means. But I like it the way it's explained in 3.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Harvey and Potter. Councillor Potter first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not the expert others are around the table really in regard to the language used in some of the documentation, but I mean, taking the point I think Councillor Leek made about the adjectives that we use in this in terms of the risk matrix. I mean, my understanding of the word catastrophic is normally associated with ruinous. I think ruinous is the word that goes with that. I've always used it in that context, and I would have thought, even for the situation we may find ourselves in regard to even the published figures for the MALS as an example, that was probably a bit over the top, and I think very significant, or descriptions of that sort would apply, but catastrophic I think I'd want to avoid if I possibly could, really, because that implies something which we haven't got control over in any way, shape or form, and I'm sure that's not the case. So, yeah, I mean, there are others, aren't there, which I think make the point equally well, but not to the extreme that catastrophic implies. So, absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Harvey.
Thanks, Chair. And along those lines, what I found interesting about 4.7 in the table was, the notion that it's 1 million plus. And I take the point that others have made that, that is significant. If we take the example of a number of projects that we've mentioned around the table, we might be talking between 3 and 5% of our budget in some terms, in terms of the investments that are made. They're significant in a different way from 1 million. So maybe you need a 4th column that just adds that weight to. I mean, there are projects around 1 million, and that's important. But when we get into the 3, the 4s, the 5 millions of this world, that is of an order of a very different scale that would relate to perhaps a 4th column, just to put that in perspective. And when I'm thinking through the process, if we do have a report that comes back on the malls, I would be very interested to see the line of accountability follow through the risk register, follow through all the policy here being implemented, of where those risks were assessed and who gave what, where and when, in the context of how that was managed. Not interested in any of the blame aspect, that's not what I'm saying. Please don't get carried away with what I'm saying there. It's the process that we followed that allowed us to get to where we've wound up. And where on this policy and the previous policy, it may not have fulfilled. It may not have been what we wanted it to be, or have given us the reassurance that we hoped we would have because we've got the policy. Be interested to see that in the report if Kevin can bring that back at that time.
Could I just add one? I mean, we've talked specifically about property issues on catastrophic and significant, but if one thinks back to our investments in Lloyd's and somebody else's preference shares, where we could have lost the lot, and that was way over £1 million. So again, I know it would have been a severe loss, but it certainly wouldn't have been catastrophic. So I think it's not just in relation to that type of building. Sorry, it could be other assets. So I think it does need scaling down a bit.
Chair, can I take it? That's useful because obviously we had some discussions about where you not so much about the wording actually, but I think you're probably right. I think severe. Somebody mentioned severe. I think that's probably a better categorisation than, if the committee are happy with that, than catastrophic. I think that's probably it gets. I mean, remember the intention is that these are guidance and they're used to complete the matrix that tells you whether you've got a low, medium or high risk. It's about how do you judge the level of risk, and I think probably severe is probably better. We also had some discussions about whether the points that you're raising, whether 1 million in that severe column was too low. Maybe it is. Maybe the significant should go up to a different number, and the severe should start at a slightly higher number. Was that what members were suggesting? So again, that's something that we can have a look at. And I mean, we looked at 3 million before. I think somebody might have mentioned 3 million as well. 5 was the other one that we looked at. So again, this is about saying, well, if there was an investment, if you took a cash investment, if there was a cash investment and the likelihood was that there was a 5 million, would you want that registered potentially as a medium risk or a high risk. And that's where we were having the discussion about the threshold. Well, what I was going to suggest, Chair, is that we will go away and have another look at that, but I wasn't going to fix a number now, but I was just getting to see if I've got the general feel of the committee that perhaps the severe category could be upped a little bit from where it is at the moment. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I've got Councillor Gardner next.
Just briefly on the subject of terminology, I certainly think that catastrophic is not a term we want to use unless it really is catastrophic. And one of the outside bodies that I was dealing with recently referred to the Tadley emergency planning zones as blast zones, which I didn't think was terribly helpful. But turning to page...
You live there.
Especially if you live there, yes, when you're dealing with the public. On page 47, probability, perhaps you can clarify this for me. A low likelihood, less than 30% chance. Well, that seems to me to be a 1 in 3. So in the event of an event happening 3 times, it will happen once, which is quite a high probability to me. My idea of a low probability is about 1 in 100 or less.
Again, this was an area where we did have some discussion. As I say, what we're trying to do here is to provide some general guidance. It's not because at the moment the current strategy just says low, medium and high. It doesn't try and quantify, and as soon as you try and quantify, you run into these types of issues about, well, is that the right? So I think in terms of this, 30% seemed about right as a low probability in terms of the event that you were judging, the risk that you were assessing. But I understand that people will have different views about that. And it's less than 30%, so it could be 1%, 2%.
Councillor Mitchell.
I'm not proposing this as, debate, but there's a lot of wordage here which I think can be improved in a very useful way to the user of the risk matrix and the risk assessments. And I'll just give you a few, and I'm quite happy to send in a note about some more if we're not going to try and agree it today. But for example, the first thing after financial service provision no effect is not a minor impact, it's no impact. So you might want to think about something like slight deterioration in service, minor deterioration in service, even better perhaps. Significance, in most cases, service provision suspended for 1 or 2 days is quite significant, and service provision suspended for more than 2 days. I mean, you could argue about whether it's 1 or 3 days or whatever, but it's that sort of level, as opposed to long term, which short term don't mean anything. Similarly, under health and safety, I think lost time due to accident is I suppose it's a risk for the business, but that's not so much a health and safety matter as something else. But broken bones is loss of life is a bit extreme, and that is catastrophic in my opinion if we actually cause through some failure of ours. Permanent disability might be something that I would regard as severe in the case of health and safety, and widespread. I don't know what large scale illness is. That's question of epidemiology, and if we cause that, we are in real trouble. Widespread illness within the council, I don't know what that means really. Again, I'm just banging on here, and I realise that. Under corporate objectives, I would say objectives, because in the minor you've got objectives of one section or one department not met. Directive and then corporate objectives, so you're going up a scale. They're not all corporate objectives, they're just objectives. So it's really just a question of making, I think, the things more real in terms of if I'm trying to assess what I mean under health and safety or under service provision. I'm not going to be twitched between no effect and what these things mean. So I just think that a little bit more care with the wordsmithing in those categories is going to be helpful to the user.
I think we're done with questions. No, I was going to say we've now strayed beyond questions into broader comment. One thing that might help, perhaps before we take any broader comment or debate, is I'm going to take the unusual step of summarising before we get into there, and that will determine whether or not we should need any broader comment or debate, or at least guide us on what we might need to say. Factual point at the start, which was in respect of the bullets where training for members was not covered, so we've suggested that there is an inclusion there of member training, certainly at induction, perhaps for specific projects or for specific committees, and potential for refresher. Factual request of the project management handbook is shared with members. Did you mean members of this committee or members more generally? That was a question, sorry.
I was actually thinking members of the performance panel, but this committee as a whole would be better.
Fine, thank you for that clarification. I think we've done to death the use of some of the wording that we've agreed to amend catastrophic to be perhaps just severe. And I think we leave it with the officer team to look at tables 4.7 and 4.8, consider whether or not we need a fourth column, and reflect the wording and the values accordingly. The only other point then that I was not so sure on, and perhaps would welcome some further guidance to summarise. 2 points were made earlier on about the monitoring of the process in Appendix 1, and a question then about sort of how do we actually evaluate continuous? You know, is there something more periodic in that? And I think whilst it's our responsibility to ensure that the strategy is put in place and that the strategy is effective, I have to say at the moment I'm not entirely convinced that Appendix 1 gives me the assurance of when things are being reviewed, particularly significant risks, so red risks, so when they are being reviewed and where in fact we are involved as a committee in that review process. And I know there was some sort of hint towards that earlier on, but that would be a helpful area to invite comment at this stage, because I'm not entirely sure where the committee is leaning on that one, or indeed whether it's comfortable where we're at. So if you're comfortable with my earlier summation of the other points, I'd welcome some comment on that particular point about ensuring the monitoring and the frequency of monitoring at the various stages of Appendix 1. Would anyone like to give me... Oh, thank you, Councillor Mitchell.
I'm not sure whether it's entirely a response to your question, Chairman, but just a point, and I may have missed it in reading the report, but something that I would look to see in a risk plan or a risk policy is to look at the confidence level of the person assessing the risk. What is because risk is often very difficult to assess, am I confident that there is no risk of health and safety in this? And sometimes that's damned obvious, that there isn't. In most cases it should be. But the confidence level you attach to the thing. And the other thing is that I do agree that we ought to move from continuously to some frequency thing, which is to do with the level of risk and the confidence level we associate with our assessment. If we're 100% confident that we've got that risk assessment right, we shouldn't need to review whether the risk is changing or not unless something interrupts the process. And so it's the frequency related to confidence.
If I may, Chair, yeah, I think I agree that that's a good point. I mean, I was going to suggest that we remove continuously monitored to frequent and appropriate monitoring, because that's in effect what you're saying, isn't it? The frequent, so that it. Okay, regular and appropriate then. Regular and appropriate, yeah. But it's also the appropriate bit. So it's both. It's regular and appropriate rather than continuous. I think would be better in those areas.
Okay, I think that's helpful. Thank you, members. So subject to that, where do you want... Yeah, I say the recommendation really was that we approved the policy. We've fed back a number of changes that we'd like to be undertaken on our behalf. are you happy that those changes will happen, and therefore we approve the policy subject to those changes? And if so, do you want to just see it? I was going to say, do you want to see it by email? Yeah. Yes. So, Councillor Parker, you had a particular... Yeah. So we're agreed that the policy is agreed subject to these changes, and that we will approve it finally once track change circulation. Marvellous. Okay. Thank you. That takes us on to paper E, and Richard, who's been waiting patiently until his moment, and it is upon us. Yeah. Yes, certainly. If you'd introduce the paper, please, Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm used to being at the top of the agenda rather than at the end, but never mind. This report, as usual, is the report of the work undertaken by the internal audit team. It covers the periods June to September this year. I've tweaked the report following comments from previous committee meetings in order to try and just focus on the key issues. Firstly, a summary of the audits we've completed is shown in paragraph 4.1 of my report. That's page 60 of 97. And in that, as you can see, we've shown the level of assurance given and reference to the summary reports in the relevant appendix. The summary reports haven't changed from previous times. And in table 4.2, paragraph 4.2, I've now added a table which highlights the overdue fundamental recommendations, giving the relevant information and adding, hopefully it'll be useful, the latest officer comment that we've received, as you know, on a monthly basis, regular or frequent. I think it's on a monthly basis that we chase for the outstanding recommendations. So hopefully you will find them useful. Just as there is a verbal update so I can give to the very first recommendation on the property system, which has been given to us since the report was written, that they do hope to have the tender sort of specced and issued by February 14. So that's obviously the recommendation. Expected completion date is April 14, but this is still the latest position we've been given. So, as well as that, the significant recommendations, the amber ones, is shown in Appendix 1. Hopefully you'll recognise the format of that report. And the final appendix is Appendix 8, which is basically all the other recommendations, which are not yet due. So obviously I've put that at the end just for your information. Hopefully there shouldn't be any queries with them. But I'm happy to take obviously any questions I'm sure you have.
Councillor Leake, you first up.
And could I just say that for personal reasons, I'm about to depart. I just wanted to raise one point. At the performance panel, where Councillor Watts and I and Councillor Mitchell spend many happy hours, we do look at the sort of graph of the housing benefit overpayment, and that is still a problem, I believe. I know they do as much as they can, but I was just wondering how, in the light of the fact that we do still have overpayments, and I'm not blaming anybody, I'm just saying we do, how we have full assurance.
Oh, for the benefit recovery, that is a separate audit. This is the housing benefit administration process, so it's the assessment of housing benefits and everything. We hope to be reporting on that audit. Is what's due to begin in December, so hopefully at the next committee.
Could I just say, as I did earlier to the chairman, I think this is much improved, and thank you very much for presenting it this way.
Thank you. Councillor Watts.
Mr. Chairman, I was previously a member of this committee while Councillor Gurdon was mayor, And I remember at that time we agreed that where an audit target date had been missed, the head of service would come to this committee to explain. I see I see one head of service here, but has that practice been discontinued, or do we just not know who the heads of service are anymore?
No, the heads of service, we do know who they are. They do know that we are vociferously chasing the completion of recommendations. I think probably Kevin's unfortunate some of the recommendations fall under his wing, so he's always here. But we haven't yet called another head of service in for explanation. But it is still part of the procedure.
No, we did actually call in the head of property. The property manager to, yes, in relation to the property manager at 4.2, and yes, and we triggered an amendment to escalation as well in the procedure to ensure that the monitoring was happening more regularly within the officer team, the senior officer team, and there's route of escalation there before coming to us, but we were more aware and had greater visibility of that escalation. So I think you make a good point, Councillor Watts, but I think we have moved on a little bit since your last sort of attendance here. Let's just make sure we keep focused on that and actually use the processes we've now put in place.
Well, it does seem to me that we're seeing targets drifting out of sight. As completion date April 2012 revised to 31st of December 2014, and so on and so on. And I actually would have liked to have, well, of course, we did have the new head of governance, didn't we, here, but it would have been completely unreasonable. I've seen cases here where the responsibility has been shifted, and I'm here now on page, can't see, 64 of 97 and onwards. The responsible officer has changed just recently. Original target date 30th of September 2011, revised to 31st of December 2012, and then the poor policy manager council was given responsibility for it on the 5th of September 2013. So the overall impression I've got from this, and I had to read it online because I hadn't got the printed copy, is a whole series of delays and the complete neglect of the targets. And I would like to feel that we will see some heads of service here. It would be wonderful, wouldn't it, if you can wait 2 years and then give someone else the responsibility for what you haven't done. But that appears to be what the practice has been with regard to the partnerships, for example. Our internal audit getting the backing from senior management and members that they should have? It doesn't seem to me from this this list we've got in front of us that that's the case. What we're going to do about it is the question.
I think some of the changes, certainly with some of the targets for 2011, 2012, were of course impacted by the structural reviews in the council, and some of the items have been discussed here, but it has been waiting for people to take post or moving the responsibilities. Certainly that wasn't the case with one of the items in property, but there were again other reasons for the change in schedule there. I would hate to say delay because it hasn't been delay, it's been a conscious effort to change the timeline. I think what it does raise for me is some of the historic note taking and some of the ways in which we deal with the target dates. I'm not suggesting we just change the dates to make it look all right, but certainly where we've got at the final point in the partnerships 3.9a, a revised completion date is already agreed. That actually subsumes what's revised in the actual original target date column. So essentially we've got a target date of 2011, then we've changed that to 2012, and now we've got an agreement saying that should be December 2013. So I'm just wondering whether some of the way in which the commentary is linked up with the tables is actually helping. It doesn't answer the overarching question about where we are prioritising and bringing heads of service forward. However, I do remember some lengthy discussion earlier on this year about this committee asking for particular heads of service to come and explain significant and outstanding, or actually fundamental at that stage, reports, actions which had not been completed for some time. And at that stage there was only one request to bring someone before this committee, and that was dealt with. So I think there's, perhaps with the change in the format there may be more visibility, but it's for us to say as a committee whether and when we wish heads of service to come before this committee. And certainly sitting here today, I am not aware of any requests certainly to bring the partnerships manager forward. It's not been something that we've raised previously, so I take the point and welcome a fresh pair of eyes, but I think it's something we all need to consider as we look at the audit report. And if we want to bring a head of service forward for a future session, then we need to notify that in advance so that we can actually do that, but be clear as to why we're doing that and what outcome we're seeking to achieve from that. Does that seem fair?
I raise a specific point then on the overdue significant recommendations, page 67 of 97, 912 developers' contributions. The commentary on the right, which I've only seen today sitting here, indicates that there's discussion going on, but I don't see this as progress towards a solution. The target date was the 31st of August 13, which is past, although not one of those very long ones. I'm wondering if we could ask the relevant head of service, which I think is the resident services, to come and talk about that to us.
Okay, I was just going to suggest though that with that particular one, is that likely to be covered in our section 106 update at the next meeting anyway, where we're looking for a broader response on where 106 contributions have or have not been paid, how long they've been outstanding, and where we are, and the process for both management. Yeah, okay. If okay, so if I take a view, you want to look at Appendix 1 in each page.
I'm happy to go through, but it's about responding to audits.
So with regard to the sort of the completion of recommendations, it is something that I've reported in past committees, that the response that generally we get from officers and managers is very good. It's say now we have an established process. We not only do we get more rapid responses from officers, but we tend to have to chasing time and again officers and managers less, and we do get a good response. So there was a comment earlier about where audit get support from senior management. We certainly do. That's been very helpful in our cause. I think that going back to the partnership recommendations, yes, they have been victims of the sort of the efficiency reviews and the changing of responsibilities, and they now reside with the policy manager only very recently, and I think the director manager would actually be the director of governance, who is fully aware, and we have spoken to on these very regularly. So we do get the support, and I think the process has improved quite dramatically. I mean, members may recall probably a year or so ago I was coming along with appendix which was sort of 18, 19, 20 pages long of outstanding recommendations. You'll see that I've managed we're now down to just the four fundamentals within the body of the report, and probably 15, 16 significance in Appendix 1, which I think is a significant improvement.
I just say I'm glad to hear that.
Okay, members, are there other questions, or would you like to look at the Appendix 1 and to pick up any other items? So I'm happy to look at sorry. Yeah, Councillor Potter, and then I'll happy to look at the pages one by one.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, if you could just indulge me, sorry, and I don't, again, as a substitute member, have the skills that others have here in regard to this matter, but I was just intrigued, and perhaps I can get an answer, under the report of the audit on the joint Manadown Committee accounts, which of course dates back, I think, to June 2013. I'm just intrigued to, sorry, I do beg your pardon, it's page 85 and 86 of 97. In terms of its reference, obviously, to income and expenditure, just intrigued to see there is no reference, obviously, to the outstanding debt, inverted commas, that we have still on the money to be paid by our partners, Hampshire County Council, in respect of Manadown. And in terms of an internal audit commentary on where we are in regard to the joint Manadown Committee and its income and expenditure, I would have thought there would be some reference to that, but there is none. Is there an explanation for that?
Thank you, Chair. This is an audit of the Joint Management Committee, so it's specifically around the role and functions of the Joint Management Committee, and that's what the audit is on the accounts that the Joint Management Committee produce. So that wouldn't be picked up. I think it was the last meeting of this committee actually, where we now produce the annual statement on all things Manadown, in effect, that brings together all of the various aspects, which include the Joint Management Committee, other expenditure and income, where we are on the option payment. So all of those are brought together annually for this committee in a separate report now. But this is a specific audit around the Joint Management Committee.
For Dante, I mean, this is the joint Manadown Committee, not the joint management committee, isn't it? But I mean, that's just a play on words. So is that what you meant?
Okay, members, so to make sure we pick up a proper review of the significant outstanding recommendations, take us back to 64, page 64, Appendix 1, and invite you to make a comment or ask questions on anything that's outstanding on that particular table. Councillor Mitchell?
It isn't really comment on what's on this particular table, but it's underlying it, and just to check. I mean, this is a long time ago, this audit, 31 of March 11, and it was my impression round about then that we were planning to seriously reduce the number of things we called partnerships, because we've used this term partnerships in a portmanteau meaning use, where many of the things concerned are not partnerships. They are working with other people, but there's no formal partnership, and we have no leverage over what the other people in the partnership do, so-called partnership. So, and my only concern is to make sure that we aren't chasing something which has been overtaken by events. We now have a partnership cabinet member, which we didn't have then, as far as I can recall. So it's just to make sure that we aren't just continuing to go through the motions of whatever it was then that was bothering the audit team. And sure, if Richard will assure me that that's the case, I'm very happy.
Yes, you're right. It is possible. I mean, for example, one of the issues we had, I remember specifically at the time, was the partnership database. There was a database that kind of existed, but was used by some and not by others. And the whole point of the audit was like, well, you need to sort it out. Either, for example, again, to use database, you either use the database and then update it so that it is effective and has a purpose, or you scrap it. And it's those sort of things which I think, the policy manager, she said, is going to be incorporated into the reviews that are going on. So I think those sort of areas are still relevant. Although yes, perhaps some of the waters might have been muddied in, as you say, the 2 years, since the audit.
Mike, Councillor Mitchell.
The latest comment suggests that much of this is out of date now, and therefore it's not clear that it's useful to us to see this anymore. We should perhaps, somebody should get a report somewhere about what we're doing about partnerships. But it's probably not this committee, if you see what I mean. That's my only concern there. The second one on that page on partnerships, well, I was going to raise the point that does this partnership database do anything for anybody? If so, whom? And in particular, if you want a database maintained, does it do anything for the person who's responsible for putting the data in it? Everybody else is probably not.
Would it be fair to at least make comment at this committee that where we've got dated recommendations and we know that things have changed significantly, that where they are, that there's now some consideration to get in respect of whether they're relevant to implement? Because I think I take the point, we don't want people to slavishly complete an audit recommendation of 2 years ago if indeed the world has moved on. And it may simply be that the way of dealing with some of these recommendations is to reflect that the world has moved on and actually there's a different thing in place now. That, because I'm with you in terms of, the recollections of changing the levels of partners to those who absolutely were in partnership and shared responsibility and risk with us, as opposed to suppliers who we happen to call partners and actually were nothing of the sort. So I think there's probably an opportunity, certainly on these two items, to look to the head of policy or the policy manager now who's taken this on and invite them to take a liberal? No, a sort of a fresh view of these recommendations in respect of sorry, that wasn't liberal with a capital L, sorry, that was yes. Take a fresh look at these recommendations and assure us as to what they're doing in terms of looking at the partnership approach rather than slavishly implementing them.
Well, Chairman, if you actually look at the comments in each section, it's the same comment, I think, in both cases from the policy manager. Policy manager saying that, the whole world's changed. We're reviewing the entire thing of partnerships and how it should be managed and things, and therefore, I think my view is we should delete these from the things being followed up by audit, because we've no idea whether these things are significant matters anymore from an audit point of view. We really can't know. And actually trying to deliver on them is maybe just somebody's having to fill in a piece of paper or something for no reason.
I think, yes, you're correct. And I note that there's due to the officer's comments is that they're expecting a sort of resolution come December. So I would imagine by the next audit committee, I'm due to report January, February time. There may indeed be a conclusion to that, so we may well have had them struck off through the natural course anyway because the work has been completed or it's been decided the work doesn't need to be completed. So perhaps if we could wait to see what gets reported for December, January, then make a decision then. I'm always happy to strike them off if they're not required anymore. But obviously, if there is still some residue work that's required, then we need to make sure that is duly completed.
Okay, if I look at page 65, Councillor Watts.
Bottom of the page, 3.4, this is the first of a whole series where we get no progress update received as at 14th of October. Has there been since then? And, well, since over the page there's another one where there's a question of whether the procurement team have the authority to mandate something. That seems to be something that needs a higher order of decision. Is this one where we need to talk to the head of service to find out why there's no progress updates coming through?
I believe our first route of escalation is, if we're unhappy with that, is to point it to the head of governance and commissioning, isn't it? I'm just trying to remember what the process we actually agreed, but we did say that in the event, sorry, it's not very effective, but in the event of something sort of not being addressed consistently, we identify it as an escalation within the officer chain first, and then seek a head of service to come to us. Yes, please.
Just of Richard, if you don't get an update on something which is out of date, doesn't it then get escalated to somebody? So this should have gone to whoever's meant to have responded. Their manager should have been chased by now. Is that about right?
Which, you know, it is like 2 weeks ago when we are due to chase again, part of our monthly process, so follow up emails literally now next week to chase again.
Can I suggest, Chairman, that we might authorise Richard to send a note to whoever the person is saying that the ARGA committee have asked me, you know, and make that your standard note that always goes out. The ARGA committee has asked me to let you know that if they get a thing that says there's no comment, they want to see you at the next meeting.
You took the words out of my mouth, Councillor Mitchell. I thought that was probably a helpful bit of sort of grease to the elbow in terms of trying to get things moving.
Yes, I mean the standard email which our team sends out, it does say quite clearly that, you know, ultimately the audit committee, you will be answerable to the audit committee, or the head of service or manager will be answerable. So we do include that in the correspondence. As I say, generally we do get a good response, but sometimes, you know, for whatever reason, you know, we do have to chase a bit more.
Perhaps I can be more explicit on these particular items then, in the sense of it has been raised today, or that ARGA would like to see progress on this matter, or will require attendance of the head of service at the next meeting. Okay, page 60. Oh, no, still on that page. Yeah, Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Gardner.
Oh, so on that page, thank you, Chairman, on 4.7 corporate governance, it seems to be a subject of great interest these days. The reason for the delay seems ridiculous to me. I mean, it basically says the outcome of this is unforecastable because something's going to council. Well, you can't forecast the outcome of something that's going to council at some future date. So you can't have any timetable for determining something, because council may look at it, committee may look at it, council may want it back again. If it's something that depends on something going to council, you can't have a timetable for completing something which may or may not have any relevance to the world after council have looked at it.
I'm not sure whether these two items actually don't come out of the recommendations that Mrs. Taylor usually brings to us at the start of ARGA, which is the update on the external governance review, because both of these seem to be relevant to that paper. So we already get an update. Some of these are done through the Constitutional Working Party, some of them are done through the IT strategy group, but essentially that paper that came out of the wonderful EY report gave a list of recommendations, and at the next meeting we would have an update on progress against all 11 actions, which are, and certainly I recognise 2 of these as being relevant to that. So I know it's something we asked to happen, so I'm not quite sure where this is sitting in terms of the audit, but
The point I'm drawing attention to is if you actually look at the recommendation, it draws attention to the fact that if you look at the website, its descriptions of our present committees are not up to date. That's what I understand that to say, right? And somebody's using the fact that we've got a long-term discussion about future constitution and future committee structures and roles, which is indeterminate, much as we'd all like to get it out of the way, it is indeterminate because it's a council matter, as an excuse for not updating the present roles of our committees, so that people who want to challenge something in the council can look at the committee structure and see where it is. Well, there's no excuse for not updating that now. It's a new recommendation about something which is real time now, as opposed to something that we don't know about because it's next year sometime. So that's not a good reason for not doing it.
I completely understand your point now, and I think I would agree with you that there's no reason why it shouldn't be updated in its current state, given that it's still current. Yeah, thank you. Okay, Councillor Parker.
Well, for the purpose of record, I just want to agree with Councillor Mitchell and endorse what he's asking. This needs some interim work. It comes under the role of openness and transparency. It's very urgent.
I can say I think it certainly is, and something we should minute as a point of action. So we need to require that action is taken without delay. 66. Yes, Councillor Gardner.
Right. A relatively trivial point. The asset register 6.1. Reminder to be sent. Now we had the target date of August for an action to take place in March 2012. I think sending a reminder out in August is a little bit premature. We'd be much better off having a target date of January 14 for an action at the end of the year. So I think the fact that you've had no progress update as of the 14th of October is no surprise whatsoever.
Yes, I believe it's 6.1, isn't it?
Yes, but the action required is an inventory at the end of the financial year, which is not till March.
Yeah, I think, Chairman, it's probably better to send a reminder closer to as part of our year-end procedures rather than now, as you say. I think that makes more sense. So what we'll do is add it to our make an amendment to this, make a comment now, which is that it be added to the year-end procedures, which we send out to all officers.
Okay, thank you for that. And page 67. Go back, yeah.
We've already had the end of a financial year. You can't ask them at the end of the financial year have they checked it, because they've got to check it against the end of the financial year. So you can only start checking it after we've had a financial year, if it means what it says. And so what you're saying is it should be checked against where it was at the end of each previous financial year, not each future financial year, and of course every future financial year when it becomes a past financial year. Or am I totally misunderstanding the recommendation?
Recommendation, maybe I was misunderstanding.
Councillor Gardner, can you help?
What it says is that assets under the control should be checked against the inventory. Now that is a real-time situation for the year end. You're quite right, Horace, March 13 has been and gone, therefore it's a bit late to worry about what was there then. It's looking at the next year, which is March 14, and the reminder needs to go out as part of the March 14 year-end procedures.
I rightly or wrongly saw it as similar to a stock check in effect, which you do at the end of the financial year.
Okay, page 67.
I can update on one of the ones that's in my remit that says no comment. 5.8 ICT, the disaster recovery site. That's due to be in place and completed by the 7th of January.
Thank you. Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chair. Just when you read down through all of the work being progressed, and when you read some of the earlier proposed completion dates, reset, delayed, revised, as the internal audit carries out its work, I do feel there's a possibility that there could be a culture of setting unrealistic completion target dates under this particular process. A concern I have when you take into account, and it was hinted at earlier by another member, we've had considerable reduction in staff numbers. There has been over the last year considerable uptake in workload, and I just think to some extent it's quite refreshing to read on page 61 the officer's update in regard to fixed assets, where it reads, however, progress has been interrupted several times due to SLT assigning other more urgent work, urgent tasks for campus support to complete. The latest being the boarding up of the former staff canteen area. And I think there's a bit of reality in that, and I think we might need to balance our comments in relation to tasks that haven't yet been performed, and there appears to be a delay with the taking on board the additional duties that some of the departments and department heads have had to take on in the last 24 months, certainly, because nobody wants to be seen to be lagging behind. And I know we had one particular instance when we looked at this issue in the same detail with the assistive internal audit. It was a piece of licensing work, and I think it had got 9 months back, and it turned out that the requirement really was not to progress in the context of the existing level of staff, but it was needed the head of department to put in a request for extra officer support, and I hope we don't miss that as being an option when they're reporting on the reason for the work not having been completed.
Councillor Mitchell.
Just for clarity, I want to come back to 67 if I may for a moment, but just for clarity on the point just raised, my understanding has always been that the target date for completion is one agreed with the manager concerned. It's not imposed. Am I right?
No, if you recall, I mean, it was a requirement. Audit Committee previously wanted all fundamental recommendations to be completed within a month of the final report date, and 3 months for significant and merits attention recommendations. So that's always something that we've, I think in the last year, 18 months, that is what we've put. Our audit reports have always been rigid in the completion dates. Sometimes it is physically impossible for such things to be completed in such a time, which I think perhaps, that I shouldn't really be saying it, but perhaps there should be some flexibility with to allow officers the time, because yes, it is something we hear regularly, that officers do to complete the recommendations. It is an extra task, something necessarily they've not done before. It is new to their area, so it is difficult. But for the last year or so, the audit reports have had a fixed 1 month for red fundamental recommendations and 3 months for the amber significant recommendations, and that's what we've stuck to. I have to say previously as well, we used to allow a revision to the completion date several years ago, but we stopped that simply because of the general confusion as to when a recommendation should be completed by.
I think, Chairman, that if I may, Stuart, that I think ARGA probably imposed that requirement at a time when we had yards and yards of these and we were getting totally pissed off with changes of dates and so forth. The point that Keith raised when he first started on this paper. That has changed dramatically, and I was very delighted, in fact, in the comment to Richard, that in this one, we have 2 from earlier years and all the rest of this year. They're new requirements, and okay, some of them should have been done, but I do think it's the case now that certainly with fundamental ones, there should be an absolute requirement, and everyone should gird up their loins and get on with it, whoever it takes to do it, because it's fundamental. If it's this next level down significant, some things are far more complicated than others, and some things are multifaceted and multi-department. And while I wouldn't want to see long dates, I'd prefer to see a reasonable date, which we can reasonably expect to be upheld. So I think to that extent I'm in agreement with Stuart.
Yeah, thank you for that, Horace. I mean, what I'm keen to ensure is that we release a bit of the pressure. I think that's a concern I have, and to sort of give an case example here on page 65 under procurement, which is saying the creditor invoice entry procedure should be updated in line with the new processes currently being implemented. Well, that sounds like quite a sort of requires an element of skill and understanding of the processes, but if you read the comment, it actually says there's not been any further progress with creditor invoice entry procedures yet. However, on the 2nd of September, our apprentice started, who is primarily involved in the creditor process. As her training progresses, it will allow time to be spent progressing this recommendation. And I see there a concern. Not a concern that it is, well, there is the concern, as Horace says, with regard to the fact that it's a significant category, but is a fundamental concern of capacity.
Councillor Gardner.
I don't agree with Stuart. I think we do have fundamental and significant risks, and if they can't be dealt with in 3 months, then I want to know why. And it may well be that there are reasons why it can't be done, in which case we should be screaming and saying, well, put some resource behind it so that it can be done. Because if it's going to be a significant risk, something can go wrong.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
You actually agree with me, Roger. I haven't said stretch necessarily the time frame. I've said exactly that. The concern is it's one of a lack of capacity, and I agree with you. We should also be asking the questions, is this an area where there is a need for extra resources? So I believe you agree with me.
I'll clarify that then. I agree with Councillor Parker.
Right, I think I'm trying to get... bear with me a second, Councillor Watts. I remember when we put in place the timelines of 1 month and 3 months because of the level of outstanding fundamental and significant issues at the time. And I actually remember much of that debate being around what would be a reasonable time, and it was very much governed by what we considered the impact of these fundamentals or significant issues not being addressed. So we started this process, so I kind of agree that we shouldn't be moving away from the timelines of 1 month and 3 months. But actually there is quite a lot of latitude in terms of supporting a culture of honesty in reporting. And where someone says to me in the progress report and recommendation, we cannot do this, we have not resources to do this. This is no longer a priority for us. Other things have subsumed it. And are seeking to reset the date. That sounds to me like a far more grown-up process than simply not providing an update and requiring to be chased. Or indeed trying to move a date, or just by default letting a date slip all the time. So I'm kind of torn between the two of you, to be honest, even though you're now agreeing, because we started this process and we've said from the start that significant and fundamental are fundamental and significant to the running of the council. Therefore, we wanted to see them progress actioned. So coming back to Councillor Watt's point earlier on, where things are slipping, or we don't believe that there's a sufficient degree of cultural honesty in terms of the update, i.e. people are giving us excuses rather than actually saying, we need help here, or actually tell us whether this is still a priority. Does this not go back to the escalation within the officer team, and for us perhaps to be making these comments to SMT here in terms of, these are the things that are fundamental and significant to your business as well, guys. If we are getting not good responses, and Paul Richard's having to chase, and he's not getting good responses, what are you doing about it? Because we don't want to sit here beating people up or making comments about it when we consider these things, and they've been identified as significant and fundamental to our business as a council. So I'm trying to look for something here that moves us forward. I don't want to slip the date, but at the same time I don't want to miss the point and try and not support officers who are trying to say to us, perhaps we need some help.
Could I come on this specific case? I wonder if the problem is with the word completion. Because if you read this story here, sorry, we're looking at 3.8 on 65, I think, yes. Which is, it could be, from an optimistic point of view, seen as a case where, because the very first thing says, due to workload, and then later on, in the same year, we got 2 apprentices starting. Now, I would like to think that the auditors have helped the management to come to terms with the fact they need more resource. And clearly, if I think everybody's now agreeing, if it really is due to workload and they haven't got the staff, then the right answer is to increase the resource, and perhaps that's what's happened here. What we haven't got here is a document, a comment saying, as a result of the overload of work, we have decided to take on some apprentices. So our process ought to allow for that to be the response. We're not completing and clearing the thing, but we're acting on this. So I think I'm agreeing with both Stuart and Roger when suggesting that perhaps managers should be encouraged to discuss with internal audit the resource issues as well as everything else.
And I think that's what I meant about the culture of honesty in trying to get the right reports. Councillor Parker.
Chair, just to soften the language, I actually had noted here, honest response. But I've drawn a line through honest and I've written frank.
I think that's fair. Yes.
For purposes of this committee, and I think Councillor Watts has summarised that very well, and it's a recommendation that I'd like to suggest this committee puts forward, that there is that capacity, there is that scope to discuss with internal audit whether, not just if the manager's got courage to do it, but it should be offered as an option.
So, go on then.
Well, just to be clear about what we're up to, can we agree alongside of that, which I do agree with, that it is unacceptable to the committee to read on a paper where the paper is dated 6 weeks after the due date, that no progress update was received? That 6 weeks after the due date for completion, the manager concerned could not even bother to respond to audit with any comment about what's going on there. That is not acceptable. And that should be escalated up the management chain instantly, not wait for this committee to do so. I want to just raise a point on page 67, if we'd finished with that one. Chairman, may I? On the first two, on 8.24 and 9.12, there, it is a fact that neither of these are matters in which the planning and development manager has any involvement or engagement at all, because they're to do with, well, marginally the commuted sum forecast, but only if the developer is disputing it, which really becomes a legal matter rather than a planning matter. And on the second one, to best, nothing to do with planning at all, because that's to do with how contributions are allocated. That's a transport matter. I don't think it's to do with the management accounting matter manager, who's the other person mentioned here. I think that's a transport matter. How the best contributions are allocated to appropriate schemes, whether ours or HCC. And frankly, you know, best doesn't exist. It's not a real thing, but we still use the language 5 or 6 years later. But it is mad that we're chasing the planning department manager about how best contributions are being allocated. I wouldn't expect him to be involved in it in any way, shape or form, because they've gone into best. They don't have to be local to the site or anything like that, unless it's a specific term. They've gone into best and they're allocated through the transport system. So please can we chase the right people on that one, which is not management accounting and not planning and development, but Tim's lot of transport guys. And the other one is again Tim's lot, not planning and development. The commuted sum could theoretically be changed.
Yes, yeah, that's a good spot. I must admit, it took me a couple of years in doing the audits to suss out exactly who is responsible for what with regards to Section 106 agreements and everything. And yes, the planning development manager, he isn't the officer that's being chased for those recommendations. So we'll get this database updated to take him off of that. But Emma and our team who does the chasing, she is aware of who the correct officer is to be chasing, and she is.
Councillor Gardner?
Just following up on what Horace was saying, the action agreed at the time of the audit, that last comment, it is not considered appropriate for spend to be made to avoid repayment as a matter of course. And I would agree with that. But it is appropriate to flag up the fact there is money there that has not been spent.
Okay, members, I think we've spent sufficient time on those 4 pages. Councillor Potter, you going to contradict me?
Sorry.
Your light's gone off again, sorry.
Sorry. I just want to say one thing. I mean, in regard to the, I think, constructive exchange about being realistic about demand and resource and the role of audit in that, and a requirement, I think, on officers to be more honest about really where the difficulties occur and be able to respond, you know, and as Councillor Mitchell said, instead of just saying, no progress, update received, no explanation of that, you know, a much more, as I say, straightforward explanation about that. But I think the role of SLT in this has to be recognised as well, because oftentimes this stuff is demand driven without necessarily an appraisal of what resource implications that may have, and clearly they've got to be in this equation and be more realistic about where the demands are made and whether those realistically can be achieved when certain things have occurred over a period. As Councillor Parker said, we have gone through a fairly severe process in terms of reduction of resources. That's the easy side of the equation, dare I say it. But then measuring that against what you still want to achieve and in a way a local authority performs its duties is much more difficult. And I think that debate is probably long overdue, and in many ways this type of thing gives rise to that, I think, with good cause, really. So I'd like to see the SLT really be engaged in this and be a bit more realistic about the way they're managing this organisation.
Okay, I'll find some words that sum that up as a recommendation and report that back to you shortly. That means we now have the appendices 2 through to close of Paper E. dare I ask, does anybody have a particular comment or question on any of those papers, or... Right, okay. So I've got 2 hands up. Tell me which paper and resolve it. Councillor Mitchell, then Councillor Gardner.
Well, I got a question on the first one, but a more general point. And I'm just wondering if we can find a way, Richard, of consuming less paper and ink on these reports, because we're all getting copies of them. Don't know anybody else is getting copies of them, but frankly, we, in the present day and age of restrictions and paper waste and so forth, we don't need a big front page anymore for this. The heading of it could be on page 1, and in some cases you'd lose an entire page of text. And if you look at margins and things, you don't need to underline headings, choose more ink. And if you used a paler grey rather than black for final or draft or wherever it is it's on, it uses dramatically less ink. So all I'm saying is just a little redesign would reduce the bulk of the papers being sent out, but reduce the use of paper and ink as well. On the first report, I think reports on the whole are very good, so I'm not criticising the content. It says income collection audit. Does it really mean cash income? Because it's not all our income. It just seems a strange word.
Well, traditionally it was the cashiers, the money, the processes involved in taking payments by cash, but increasingly that's involved. Cash is becoming less and less of as a method of payment, but it's credit cards, debit cards, telephone payments, and payments over the internet as well. So we changed it. I changed the title from cash to income collection to try and incorporate all the other streams, that essentially come through the customer services team. We're not talking about any other, like developers' contributions income and that, but it's all the stuff which does go through customer services. So if you have a suggestion for an alternative name, I'm more than happy to take it on.
Well, it's just that it brought me up short, and I started looking at it and I realised it wasn't what I thought it was. You might just say customer services income collection audit, just for clarity. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Gardner.
Right, the first question is on the income collection audit and refers to the question of the door. I'll be interested to know how long the problem had existed before internal audit found it, why it wasn't reported to campus support when it first occurred, and why campus support seems to be taking so long to fix it rather than just going ahead and doing it.
They've ordered the new lock. They've ordered the new lock.
I don't think it's quite as simple as going to B&Q and buying a new lock. To answer, I can't recall the details of the report as to how long it was there open before we rocked up and saw it. But obviously we would expect it to be done. I think presumably we gave it a significant, which means it didn't seem a fundamental, because that would have required a month. But overall we gave it significant, which does give them the 3 months. But so we are chasing. No, I'll tell a lie, because we're not actually chasing that recommendation, because it's not due for completion to the end of this month. So we'll be sending a reminder out to ask what the situation is, or we could simply just wander over and have a look. Yeah.
There was a comment somewhere where he'd ordered it. They'd ordered the lock, but that's all they've done. They'd ordered the lock.
Okay, I've got a second question, but I still think that is something that should be resolved as soon as possible and not just left. Business continuity. A reasonable assurance. 1 fundamental, 7 significant, 8 merits attention, and the management response. The BC arrangements which are largely satisfactory. Do you actually think they are largely satisfactory given the number of risks?
Well, it is. It is a judgment, considering the scope of the audit and how difficult it is to try and cater for every single eventuality. I do genuinely believe, that the issues we only gave the one fundamental. Again, this is one area that has been handed down from one officer to another, and the officer who picks up the business continuity has had to learn on the job, I believe, and I think it's generally they're heading in the right direction as far as business continuity goes, which is why we gave. I don't usually like to give reasonable assurance because it kind of sits in the middle. We like to either say good or bad and black and white, but I think in this case, I think it is appropriate, bearing in mind the progress that that the officers are making. It's an area it's difficult. It's not black and white like a lot of other audits that we do, and that's our honest opinion, that they are making progress towards towards achieving sort of the compliance. We don't need to necessarily comply with the ISO standard, because in order to meet those standards you have to jump through many expensive hoops, but we follow the ethos of the ISO standard, and in all honesty it's our judgment, and we stand or fall by that, but I do believe the officers are heading in the right direction.
Okay, I don't think business continuity is a matter of pass the parcel, and I'd like some comment from Kevin on how the business continuity situation fits into the risk management strategy.
It will be assessed by the business units and on particular issues. So around my business unit, my service plan, there will be elements that relate to business continuity. So there'll be risks around IT, which are risks that are associated with business continuity. So they are linked, but there's also separate procedures and separate processes.
And the risk is?
Well, there are many risks, varied risks, and depending on which areas are being looked at. I mean, the key one of the ones that was here was to make sure from my business unit perspective as a support business unit, and if you take IT as that unit, that the IT recovery plan is recovering those services in the order and in the time frame that the organisation needs them. And that was one of the issues that the audit identified was, well, initially there perhaps wasn't an ideal match between the services that IT will bring up and the services that the council needs. And so that the risk is that you have a disaster position or a business continuity issue and you don't bring up the services that the organisation needs. So that's the sort of thing that we will be looking at in the service plan. And it's also the thing that's linked into the business continuity, because the corporate group has looked at, well, what do the services that the organisation need and the time frame that they need them, and then IT can say, right, now we can bring those up in that time frame, or no, we can't.
Did you have any other issues? Before we go on then, I will need to move to suspend standing orders. I was hoping to avoid it, but if we've got another question, carry on. Sorry, did we agree to that? Thank you. Councillor Mitchell, now you.
I do really agree with what was said about business continuity, because it is critical. And perhaps a message should go from the committee at the beginning, as opposed to when we see what's happened later, that says the committee does expect that all of these items will be completed on the time stated. And we'll want to know the reasons why. The committee will want to know the reasons why, as opposed to having a message that comes to our next meeting or whenever that says no reply received from somebody in this particular case, because it is critical. Yes, it's severe, the risk of business continuity letting us down.
Councillor Parker.
Close to that, Chair, I just wanted to point out that I think it's not really appropriate for a head of service to, against the recommendation, where the heading then says action agreed, just to agree it. On page 4 of 4, which is 75. There are two. It's in the housing. Starts page 72, but on page 75, we just have comment agreed, and I think that's something also that I think, again, really, we as a committee are going to have to wait again now until the next report to even get an idea of how it's intended for that recommendation to be achieved. And I think there's no reason why there couldn't be some indication, because the majority of the recommendations, there is some comment as to a suggestion as to how that's going to be achieved. We might just as well put yes or tick.
Okay. Right. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to try and conclude. I was just trying to think, was that questions or debate? But there we are, we'll say that they morphed into one. We started off by talking about needing some assurance that there was a greater rigour in providing response to audits, and how we then ensured that outstanding audit recommendations were still relevant and appropriately actioned. I think in a specific point we looked at item 4.7 on page 6597, which was requiring an update to the committee roles now, not waiting for the result of constitutional working party. So that was something that as a committee we recommend or require to be done as soon as possible. I think then more generally there were two comments that sort of, I hope, sums up the feeling of the afternoon in respect of the audit report. Or three actually. Firstly, that we welcome the summary tables at the front and the new format of the report, which I think has helped us to get more quickly to the heart of issues, and that's been a very helpful response to previous requests to the committee. So thank you for that. That ARGA looks to recommend, or ARGA recommends, that service heads are encouraged to provide a frank response to internal audit in respect of the requirements and dates in which they can deal with matters, and to escalate or encourage them to escalate to SMT to close down actions within the agreed timelines and seek additional resources if that is what's needed to close those actions down, specifically in relation to fundamental and significant items. Further, that ARGA does not accept progress updates that do not provide a genuine update. We wish to ensure that the updates are timely, so not more than 6 weeks old, and that we get an honest agreement from the services about the actions they're taken, and whether or not they can or cannot discharge those actions, and looking for our help and support in getting appropriate resources or prioritisation as necessary. The first point of escalation obviously being SMT. Don't want to miss Councillor Mitchell's comment about the format of reporting, so we can be more eco-friendly. I think it's a helpful way of setting the reports out, but where we can do it in one page, then please do so. I think then finally, given the current climate of change, and indeed just today with things like the weather, business continuity is critical to this business in order for us to be able to support the people that we are here to serve. So I think the recommendation is that ARGA expects the actions to deliver business continuity to be resolved within the stated timelines, and not postponed, or to report back to us where issues are not dealt with. But if their timelines are currently agreed, both for fundamental and significant items, then ARGA expects them to be resolved by the time we next get a report on those matters. Is that fair? Thank you. I think that closes our meeting. Oh, sorry,
Just
Councillor
say,
Mitchell. Yep.
for the record, that I would congratulate the team on the way that big list of all the things that are late has dramatically reduced in the last year or so.
I think that's a welcome endorsement from us all, so thank you for that. Thank you, members. That closes Arga for today at 5 minutes. Thank you very much, and safe journey home.